"I haven't eaten in 2 days," he said. "But that's not why I knocked." Eleanor Hayes stood in her doorway with flour on her hands and looked at the man in the raincoat, torn, jaw-tight eyes carrying 3 years of nowhere. He hadn't come begging. He'd come because the light in her window was the first warm thing he'd seen in longer than he could remember. She didn't ask his name, didn't ask where he'd been. She asked the only thing that mattered. "Have you had a warm meal?" Thomas Callahan's throat closed around an answer he couldn't find because nobody had asked him that. Not once. Not in 3 years. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to know how far this story travels. Subscribe and stay until the very end. The storm had been building since mid-afternoon, the kind that rolls across Montana without apology, bending fence posts and driving cattle into corners. By the time the worst of it hit Silver Creek, most people had locked their shutters and pulled their families close to whatever warmth they had. The streets emptied fast. Sensible people didn't walk in weather like that. Thomas Callahan was not a sensible man. Or maybe he was simply a man who had run out of choices. He'd been riding since before sunrise, pushing his horse harder than he should have, trying to reach the next town before dark. But the storm had other plans. His mare, a brown and white pinto named Cora, that had carried him across 3 states without complaint, finally stopped moving. Not from injury, from exhaustion. She just stood in the middle of the road with her head down, breathing hard, and Thomas understood. He didn't push her. He climbed down into the mud and walked. He didn't know Silver Creek existed until he nearly walked past it. The town was small, a general store, a livery, a church, a saloon. He didn't intend to enter, and a narrow building with a painted sign swinging violently in the wind. The letters were nearly impossible to read, but he made out enough. Hayes Bakery. A faint light glowed in the window. He tied Cora to the post out front. He didn't know why he stopped there instead of the livery. Something about the light, maybe. Or maybe he just needed a reason to stop. He knocked. Eleanor Hayes heard the knock and didn't move right away. She was standing at her work table, hands deep in bread dough she'd been working for the past half hour, and her first instinct was to ignore it. It was past 8 in the evening. The bakery had been closed for 3 hours. Nobody knocked on a bakery door at 8 in the evening during a storm with any decent reason. But then she heard it again, not loud, not urgent, just a quiet, steady knock. The kind of knock a person makes when they're not sure they have the right to knock at all. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door. The man standing on her step was tall, broad-shouldered, and absolutely soaked. His coat had been good once she could tell by the cut of it, but it had been through too many seasons and not enough care. There was a cut above his right eyebrow that had bled recently and dried in the cold. His beard was 3 weeks past needing a trim. His eyes, though. His eyes were steady. Tired in a way that went beyond one bad night, but steady. He held his hat in both hands. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said. "I saw the light. I was wondering if you could tell me where the livery is. My horse needs shelter." Eleanor looked past him at the pinto standing in the rain with its head bowed nearly to the ground. She looked back at him. "The livery's half a mile east," she said. "Hank closes at 6. He won't open again until morning." The man nodded slowly, like that was the answer he expected. "Thank you," he said, and he turned to go. "Have you had a warm meal?" He stopped. He didn't turn around immediately. She watched his shoulders do something, not quite a flinch, not quite a tightening, something in between that she recognized because she had felt it herself. It was the reaction of a person who had been bracing for rejection so long that a moment of unexpected kindness didn't feel safe. He turned around. "Ma'am." "A meal," Eleanor said. "Have you eaten today?" He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not looking for charity." "I didn't offer you charity," she said. "I asked if you'd eaten. That's a different question." Something moved across his face that she couldn't quite name. He looked at the hat in his hands. Then he looked back at her. "No," he said quietly. "I haven't." Eleanor stepped back from the door. "Then come inside. I'll put something on the stove. You can tell me about your horse." Thomas Callahan had not sat at a stranger's table in a very long time. He'd eaten plenty of meals in those years, jerky and the saddle beans beside a fire biscuits bought cold from general stores. But sitting at a table under a roof with someone moving around a kitchen for him, that was different. That required something he wasn't sure he still had, the willingness to be seen. He sat on the edge of the chair nearest the door. He kept his hat on his knee. He watched the woman work without speaking because he couldn't think of anything to say that wouldn't sound wrong. She moved like a person who was used to moving alone in a kitchen, efficient, quiet, no wasted motion. She had dark hair pinned up loosely, a few strands falling forward across her forehead. Her apron had flour on it. She was probably around his age, maybe a little younger, with the kind of face that had learned to stay calm, whether it wanted to or not. She put a pot on the stove without asking what he wanted. "Your horse will be all right outside for a few minutes," she said, not looking at him. "Once you've eaten, we'll get her to the livery." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She turned and looked at him. "What's her name?" He blinked. "What?" "Your horse." "Cora." Eleanor nodded like that was useful information. "She's been ridden hard. We had a long day." "Where are you coming from?" He hesitated just a fraction of a second, not long enough for most people to catch, but she caught it. "Billings," he said. "Originally." Eleanor didn't ask what originally meant. She just turned back to the stove. Thomas looked around the bakery. It was a simple room, 2 small tables for customers, a long wooden counter, shelves behind it with jars and wrapped goods. On the wall near the window, there was a small photograph in a frame too far away for him to see clearly. And on the counter beside the register, a child's drawing of a house colored in with something orange and yellow. "You have children?" he asked. "A son," she said. "He's 7. He's sleeping upstairs." A pause. "His name is Charlie. He draws—" Eleanor glanced at the picture. A small smile moved across her face. "He says that's supposed to be this building, with the sun behind it." Thomas looked at it again. The orange and yellow made sense now. "He got the sun right?" he said. She looked at him then, like she was reassessing something. Then she turned back to the stove. She set a bowl of beef stew in front of him, thick and hot, with a heel of bread on the side and a cup of coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Thomas ate carefully at first, the way a person eats when they're trying not to reveal how hungry they are. Then the hunger won, and he stopped being careful. He ate everything in the bowl without speaking. And when he looked up, she was sitting across the table from him, with her own cup of coffee, not staring at him, just present. "Thank you," he said. He meant it fully. "I'll pay." "It's a bowl of stew," Eleanor said. "Don't insult us both." He looked at her. She was watching him with eyes that were direct without being unkind. He had the sudden uncomfortable feeling that she could see considerably more than he wanted her to. "I was passing through," he said. It came out more like a defense than a fact. "Most people who come through Silver Creek are," she said. "The ones who stay usually didn't plan to." He didn't know what to do with that. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "My saddle needs repair," he said, keeping it practical. "The left stirrup strap has been giving me trouble. Is there a leather worker in town?" "Jim Doyle, 2 streets over. He's good. He'll have you back on the road in a day, maybe 2. "A day. If he's busy too." She tilted her head slightly. "Is that a problem?" Thomas looked at the table. "I just don't want to overstay." "In my bakery. In your town." Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Where exactly are you in a hurry to get to?" He didn't answer right away. The truth was, there was nowhere. There had been nowhere for a long time. He had directions, always some next place, some reason to keep moving, but not a destination. Destination implied something waiting for you. He had stopped believing in that. "West," he said finally. Eleanor nodded like that was a complete answer, which somehow made it worse. "Well," she said, "you've got a night in Silver Creek first, and your horse needs more than a night." He looked at her. "Why are you helping me?" She considered that. "Because you knocked," she said simply. "And because you said thank you like you weren't sure you deserved to." Thomas had nothing to say to that. He looked down at his empty bowl. "I'll find the livery in the morning," he said. "I can sleep in the stable with Cora." "That's foolish. It's still storming." She stood and carried his bowl to the basin. "There's a boarding house at the end of the main street. Mrs. Larkin. Tell her Eleanor sent you, she'll give you the back room. I can pay for it." "I know you can." She turned and looked at him. "I wasn't suggesting otherwise." Thomas found the boarding house without trouble. Mrs. Larkin was a round woman in her 60s, who did in fact give him the back room when he mentioned Eleanor's name. And she did it with a warmth that suggested Eleanor's name carried weight in this town. He paid for 2 nights. It seemed wise to allow for the saddle repair, and he lay down on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling while the storm threw rain against the window. He was not as a rule a man who thought much about encounters. He had trained himself out of that. Thinking too long about the people he met, the places he passed through, the moments that could have been something, it led nowhere useful. He had learned that the hard way. But he lay there thinking about the woman in the bakery, not in the way a man thinks about a beautiful woman, though she was. He thought about the question she'd asked, the simplicity of it. "Have you had a warm meal?" As if that were the only thing that mattered. As if she looked at a man standing in the rain, and the only information she needed was whether he was hungry. He had been through a dozen towns in the past year. Some had been suspicious of him, some merely indifferent. A few had offered work. Nobody had offered that. He told himself it didn't mean anything. People in small towns were often generous. It was survival logic, take care of strangers, because someday you might be the stranger. He told himself that twice before he fell asleep. In the morning, the storm was gone, and Silver Creek looked like a different world. The muddy streets reflected a pale blue sky. Children were already out jumping the puddles on the main street. Somewhere behind him, Thomas could hear the sound of a hammer at a forge, and carried on the wind the smell of fresh bread. He found Jim Doyle at his shop, a leathery man in his 50s, who looked at the stirrup strap and sucked air through his teeth, like a doctor looking at a wound. 2 days, he said. Maybe 3. This strap's been stressed in 3 places. Do it right or don't bother. Do it right, Thomas said. He settled Cora in the livery. Hank charged him fair and gave the horse good hay, and then he stood on the main street of Silver Creek, Montana, with nowhere to be for 2 days and nothing to do with himself. He did not go back to the bakery. He walked the town instead. He went to the general store, bought enough supplies to get him to the next town, rolled a cigarette he didn't really want, and stood by the far fence watching a rancher trying to work a young horse that didn't want to be worked. Thomas watched for about 3 minutes before he could see the problem. The rancher, a stocky man named Gus Prentice, as Thomas learned later, was pulling the lead too tight, which was making the horse panic, which was making Gus pull tighter, which was making everything worse in that particular loop that inexperienced horse handlers always found themselves in. Thomas crushed the cigarette under his boot and walked over. "Mind if I try something?" he said. Gus looked at him with the face every rancher gives a stranger who offers unsolicited advice. Flat and not quite friendly. "You know horses?" "Some." Gus handed over the lead mostly out of frustration. Thomas took the lead with slack in it. Just slack. He stood still and let the horse feel that there was room to breathe. It took about 30 seconds. Then the horse stopped moving, ears still nervous but body quieting, and Thomas began to work. He didn't explain what he was doing. He just did it. 15 minutes later, the young horse was walking beside him like they'd known each other for years. Gus stared. "Where'd you learn that?" he said. "Montana," Thomas said. "Long time ago." Word moved through Silver Creek, the way words do in small towns, faster than wind, and with considerably less accuracy. By afternoon, 3 different ranchers had approached Thomas about their animals. He helped one with a horse that had developed a bad shoe shyness. He spent an hour working with another man's mule, that had decided fences were personal enemies. He did it all without being asked twice and without naming a price, and the ranchers didn't quite know what to do with him. They fed him lunch finally. Gus Prentice brought him to a table at the saloon. Thomas accepted the meal and refused the whiskey, and 3 other men sat with them, asking questions. Thomas answered as minimally as possible. "You looking for work?" Gus asked. "I'm just here for a saddle repair." "Doyle'll take 2-3 days. That's 2-3 days of sitting around." Thomas looked at him. "Henderson's ranch north of town needs fence riders," Gus said. "Lost 2 men last month. Pays fair." "I appreciate that," Thomas said. "I'll think on it." He wasn't going to think on it, or that's what he told himself. Eleanor noticed him on the second day. Not the first sighting, she had seen him cross the street that morning, and recognized the coat and the unhurried walk. She noticed him properly the second day, because he came past the bakery twice without coming in, and she had been in this business long enough to know when someone was wrestling with themselves about a decision. The third time he passed, she went to the door and opened it. "Jim Doyle said it would be 3 days," she said. Thomas stopped walking. He looked at her with something that might have been mild embarrassment. "News travels," he said. "It's Silver Creek." She leaned against the doorframe. "You've been helping people with their horses." "Passing the time." "Gus Prentice came in this morning for his bread. Told me you got that young roan to come around in under 20 minutes. He's been fighting that horse for 6 weeks. Thomas looked away down the street. "Just took some patience," he said. "That's not a common skill," Eleanor said. "The patience part." He looked back at her. She was watching him with those direct, assessing eyes that he was beginning to find both unsettling and oddly steadying at the same time. Like being looked at by someone who could see clearly but had no intention of using what they saw against you. "The Henderson Ranch is hiring fence riders," she said. "It's real work, 2-3 months through spring, before you disappear west to nowhere in particular." "I'm not disappearing." "You're not staying either." He didn't argue with that. "Come in," she said. "I have coffee. Charlie's been asking about the man who fixed Gus's roan." Thomas looked at the door. He looked at her. He looked at the door again. "1 cup," he said. Charlie Hayes was a small, serious-faced boy with his mother's dark eyes and apparently no fear of strangers whatsoever. He came downstairs the moment Thomas sat down at the table, planted himself directly in front of him, and said, "Mama said you know horses." "Some," Thomas said. "What kind?" "Most kinds." Charlie considered this. "Do you know how to break a horse without hurting it?" Thomas looked at Eleanor, who was pouring coffee with her back slightly turned the way parents do when they want to pretend they're not listening. "There's ways to do it," Thomas said carefully, "that take longer, but don't leave the horse scared. That's the better way if you have time for it." Charlie nodded very seriously. "My papa used to work with horses," he said, "before he died." The kitchen went briefly quiet. Eleanor set the coffee cup down on the table in front of Thomas and said, "Charlie." "It's all right," Thomas said. He looked at the boy. "What was your papa's name?" "William," Charlie said. "William Hayes." Thomas nodded. "That's a good name." "He was good," Charlie said in the perfectly matter-of-fact way that children sometimes say the truest things. "Mama misses him." "Charlie," Eleanor said, quiet but firm. "She does," Charlie said, completely unapologetic. Then he looked at Thomas with those grave, dark eyes. "Do you miss anyone?" The question hit Thomas somewhere in the chest he hadn't expected to be vulnerable. He held the coffee cup with both hands. He looked at the boy for a moment that stretched a second longer than he intended. Then he said, "Yes, some people." Charlie seemed satisfied with that. "Okay," he said, and then he was gone back upstairs as quickly as he had appeared, leaving Thomas sitting in his wake. Eleanor sat down across from him. She looked at him with an expression that was half apology and half something else. "He has no filters," she said. "He's honest," Thomas said. "That's not a flaw." She wrapped both hands around her own cup. He doesn't usually talk to strangers that way. Maybe I don't read as very strange, Thomas said. Something softened slightly in her face. No, she said. You don't. They sat with their coffee for a while. Outside, the afternoon light was moving west. Someone's horse clattered past on the street. In the distance, a dog barked twice and stopped. Your husband worked cattle? Thomas asked eventually. Cattle and horses both, Eleanor said. He grew up ranching. He was very good at it. A pause. 5 years ago, there was an accident during a drive. A steer panicked in the river crossing. William went in after it. She looked at her coffee. They found him a mile downstream. I'm sorry, Thomas said. Charlie was too, she said. He doesn't really remember him, just the stories. She looked up. I've told him a lot of stories. Good ones. True ones, she said, which usually means good. Thomas looked at her across the table. There was something in the way she said it, the quiet steadiness of a woman who had decided somewhere in those 5 years that she was going to carry everything that needed carrying and carry it with her back straight. He recognized that, not because he was strong in the same way, because he knew what it cost. How long have you had the bakery? He asked. 4 years. After William died, I needed income. His family offered to take Charlie and let me go back to my parents in Missouri. I said no. She looked at him. This was Williamstown. Charlie should know it. That was brave. That was stubborn, she said with the first real smile he'd seen from her. There's a difference. Thomas smiled. It felt strange on his face. Not painful, just unfamiliar, like a muscle that hadn't been used in a while and was surprised to be called on. He took the Henderson job. He told himself it was because Gus Prentice was persistent, and because 2 months of wages would get him properly outfitted for the road west, and because Doyle's saddle repair was going to take 4 days now, and he needed to be doing something with his hands. All of those things were true. They were not the whole truth. He moved out of Mrs. Larkin's boarding house and into the bunkhouse at Henderson's ranch, which was a rougher arrangement but a practical one. He rode fence lines from first light, did the work the job required, and came into town once a week for supplies, and he admitted this only to himself conversation. The conversation specifically was at the bakery. It started practically. Eleanor needed a fence post replaced on the south side of her property, and one of the ranch hands mentioned Thomas was good with that kind of work. He came on a Saturday. He fixed the post. Charlie watched the entire operation with intense focus and asked approximately 40 questions, most of them good ones. Eleanor brought out coffee when he was done. They talked for 2 hours. The following Saturday, the gate latch needed replacing. Thomas fixed that too. He wasn't sure by that point whether the latch had actually needed fixing before he arrived or whether Eleanor had noticed it needed attention at a convenient time. He decided it didn't matter. The pattern established itself without either of them naming it. He came on Saturdays. He found something to repair. Charlie asked questions. Eleanor made coffee. They talked. He told her about working ranches across Wyoming and Colorado, about the horses he'd trained, the land he'd traveled. He left certain things out, the years he didn't want to explain the town in Wyoming. He never intended to mention the accident he had spent 3 years trying to outrun. But the things he told her were true, and she listened, the way he imagined a person listened, when they were actually interested rather than merely polite. She told him about learning to bake from her grandmother, a woman who apparently ran her kitchen like a military campaign, and believed that proper bread was a moral responsibility. About the early months after William died, when she hadn't been sure she could make the bakery work, when the money ran tighter than she let anyone know. About the morning Charlie came downstairs when he was 4 years old, flour somehow already on his hands from some unauthorized countertop expedition, and announced that he had made breakfast. He had not made breakfast, Eleanor said. He had opened a jar of preserves and put his entire hand in it. Thomas laughed. A real one. It surprised him. Eleanor looked at him with an expression that was warm and careful at the same time, like she understood what the laugh cost him and wasn't going to make a thing of it. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday. Thomas was riding fence on the north pasture when he saw the buggy, expensive black lacquered, too fine for an ordinary rancher, moving along the road toward town. The man driving it was heavy-set, well-dressed, with the kind of posture that came from spending a long time being used to being looked at. One of the other hands, a quiet older cowboy named Reese, pulled up beside him. "Briggs," Reese said with the tone a man uses for something unpleasant. "Who is he?" "Walter Briggs. Owns the B-Cross spread south of town. Cattle mostly, but what he really owns is opinions." Reese watched the buggy disappear around the bend. "Came to Silver Creek 7 years ago from somewhere east. Bought land cheap, sold it expensive, bought more. Half the men who used to own property around here now lease from him." Thomas looked at where the buggy had been. "He's got an eye on Eleanor Hayes's land," Reese said like it was something he'd said before. "Why? Trade routes coming through. New road, maybe a rail spur. Her bakery sits on the junction property. It'll be worth 3 times what it is now, maybe more in about 2 years. Reese looked at him. "Briggs offered her twice its current value last spring. She said no." And he's not a man who's used to no." Reese turned his horse. "Just figured you ought to know since you're over there most Saturdays." Thomas said nothing. He turned his horse and went back to the fence. He mentioned it to Eleanor that Saturday carefully, because he wasn't sure how she'd take someone talking about her business in his hearing. She didn't seem surprised. "Walter's been offering since January," she said, refilling his coffee without being asked. "I've told him each time that the property isn't for sale." "He give you any trouble?" She paused with the coffee pot still in her hand, just a half-second pause. Then she set it down and said, "He's very—" She chose the word carefully, persistent. "Eleanor." She looked at him. "Did he give you trouble?" She sat down. She laced her hands together on the table and looked at them for a moment. "He came in 3 weeks ago," she said, "after closing. Said he wanted to make a final offer. Said things like that a widow running a bakery alone with a young child was admirable, but that I had to think practically, that this town was going to change, that I should secure Charlie's future while I could." Thomas was very still. "He wasn't threatening," Eleanor said. "He was never quite threatening. He's too careful for that." A pause. "He was informing me of my circumstances. The way men like that do." "What did you say?" "I told him the bakery wasn't for sale and that the hour was late." She looked up. He left. Thomas sat back in his chair. He was aware of a specific feeling in his chest. Not quite anger, not yet, but something in that direction. The quiet building kind. "You could get the sheriff. Tom Parker is a decent man," Eleanor said. "But Walter Briggs hasn't done anything actionable. He came in and made an offer. That's legal." She looked at him steadily. "I've handled worse than Walter Briggs." Thomas believed her, but he also knew what he'd seen in that half-second pause when he'd asked if Briggs had given her trouble, and he knew what it meant when someone chose the word persistent that carefully. "All right," he said. He let it go for the moment. Eleanor was not a woman who wanted to be managed, and she was right that there was nothing to be done about a man making an offer. But he rode past the bakery road on his way back to the ranch that evening, and again the next morning on his way out. He told himself that was coincidence. He stopped telling himself things like that fairly soon after. 3 weeks later, Charlie came into the bakery from the yard with a face so carefully composed that Eleanor knew immediately something had happened. "What is it?" she said. Charlie set something on the counter. It was a folded piece of paper. Eleanor opened it. There were 3 words written in a clean, deliberate hand. "Sell the land. No signature." She stood with the paper in her hands for a long moment. Charlie was watching her with those grave, dark eyes, trying to read her face. "Where did you find this?" she said, keeping her voice level. "On the back step," Charlie said. Under a rock. Eleanor folded the paper closed. Go finish your reading, she said quietly. Mama. Charlie. She looked at him. I'm all right. Go finish your reading. He went. Eleanor stood in the kitchen for a moment alone. She put the note in her apron pocket. Then she put a tray in the oven that didn't need to go in the oven yet because she needed something to do with her hands. She was still there when Thomas came through the back gate 20 minutes later. He took one look at her and said, What happened? She pulled the note from her pocket and put it on the table without speaking. He read it. He put it back down. He stood very still. Charlie found it on the back step, she said. Under a rock. This morning. An hour ago. Thomas looked at the note for another moment. Then he looked at her. I'm going to go have a conversation with Walter Briggs, he said. No, Eleanor, no. She said it firmly but not unkindly. She looked at him. If you go to Briggs now and say something, he'll say he doesn't know what you're talking about. He'll look confused and reasonable. And then it will look like you are an aggressive drifter who rode into town and started making accusations against a respected landowner. She held his gaze. Is that what you want to give him? Thomas said nothing. He picked up the note. I'm going to Tom Parker, he said. I'll go, she said. It's my property, my note. I'll come with you. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she took off her apron, folded it on the counter, and said, All right. They walked to the sheriff's office together. Tom Parker, to his credit, took the note seriously. He made a record of it, asked careful questions, and told Eleanor he would speak to Briggs. He also told them both plainly that without a signature, there was little he could do beyond that. A note was not an actionable threat. Silver Creek's law had limits. Thomas kept his voice level through the entire conversation. Walking back, Eleanor said, You're angry. I'm thinking, he said. You're thinking angrily. He looked at her sidelong. Would you prefer I wasn't? She was quiet for a moment. No, she said finally. I appreciate it. They walked in silence for another half block. I grew up in a town not much different from this one, Thomas said eventually. In Wyoming. My father was a small rancher. When I was 17, a man like Briggs came in and started buying up the valley. By the time I was 20, my father's land was gone. Eleanor looked at him. He didn't force anyone, Thomas said. He was very legal about everything, made offers, created pressure, made sure the bank loans got harder to get, made sure the market prices shifted in ways that made it harder to stay profitable. A pause. Men like Briggs don't use guns. They use circumstances. She was quiet for a moment. Is that why you left Wyoming? Thomas looked straight ahead. That's part of it, he said. She didn't press. She had the wisdom to understand that part of it was all he had to give right now. They stopped at the corner where the bakery road split from the main street. Thank you, she said, for coming with me. It wasn't enough, he said. It was more than nothing, she said. And it wasn't nothing. He looked at her. The afternoon light was in her eyes, and she was looking at him with that steady, clear gaze of hers, and he was suddenly powerfully aware of how close they were standing. He stepped back. I'll ride by this evening, he said. Make sure everything's in order. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, he said, and then quieter. That's a different thing. He walked away before either of them could say anything more. He was halfway down the street when he heard her laugh, just briefly, a small, genuine laugh, and he had to think very carefully about the road in front of him to keep walking in a straight line. He had told himself he was just passing through. He had told himself Silver Creek was one stop among many a place he would remember the same way he remembered other towns as a name, a direction, a few days on the road. He had told himself a great many things that were becoming increasingly difficult to believe. The woman in the bakery saw him without flinching. The boy asked him real questions. The town was slowly learning his name. And Thomas Callahan, who had spent 3 years becoming invisible on purpose, was beginning to feel against every intention he had. Like a man who existed somewhere specific. He didn't know yet what that was going to cost him. But he was beginning to understand that some prices, when they came, felt less like loss and more like something long overdue being settled at last. The note disappeared from Eleanor's kitchen table, but the weight of it didn't. She went about her week the way she always did, up before 5, fire in the stove dough, by 6, first loaves in the oven by 7. Charlie ate his breakfast and walked to school and came home with dirt on his knees and questions about everything. The bakery opened, the bakery closed, the money came in thin but steady. From the outside, nothing had changed. Inside was a different matter. She caught herself checking the back step every morning before Charlie came downstairs. She started locking the rear gate at night, which she had never done before. Small adjustments, small surrenders to a fear she refused to name out loud. Because naming it would make it larger, and she had too much to carry already. Thomas came on Saturday as usual. He didn't mention the note. He came through the back gate with his hat in his hand and a loose hinge from the livery that needed a matching piece from her hardware shelf, which was a reasonable enough excuse, and Eleanor didn't call it an excuse because it got him in the door, and that was what mattered. Charlie descended on him before he was fully through the door. "Can you show me the thing you did with the roan?" Charlie said. "The patience thing." "Charlie, he just got here." "It's all right," Thomas said. He looked down at the boy. "You mean with the lead?" "The slack," Charlie said. "Reese told me you give them slack instead of pulling. He said that's why they trust you." Thomas looked at him with the particular expression he got sometimes when Charlie said something he hadn't expected. A kind of quiet attention, like the boy had surprised him into being present in a way he usually defended against. "You've been talking to Reese," Thomas said. "He came in for bread on Wednesday. We talked for a while." Charlie was matter-of-fact about it. "He said you were the best with horses he'd ever ridden alongside. He said you used to be famous for it before." The kitchen went quiet the way it did sometimes when Charlie walked straight through a door everyone else knew to go around. Eleanor watched Thomas's face. She saw the thing happen, not pain exactly, more like a door being pushed against that he had been pressing his weight on for a long time. He kept his expression still, but she saw it. "Reese talks too much," Thomas said, and his voice was even. "Is it true?" Charlie asked. "Some of it." "What's the before part?" "Charlie." Eleanor's voice was quiet but final. Charlie looked at her, understood the signal, and redirected with the particular skill of a 7-year-old who had learned to pick his battles. "Will you show me the slack thing with the lead?" he said to Thomas. "I can get the rope from the shed." Thomas looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "After I fix the hinge." Charlie was out the back door before the sentence was finished. Eleanor turned to the stove, so Thomas wouldn't see her face. She was not going to smile. She was absolutely not going to smile. "He's relentless," Thomas said behind her. "He comes by it honestly," she said. And then because she couldn't help it, his father was the same way. She heard Thomas set the hinge down on the table. A beat of quiet. "You don't have to stop talking about him," Thomas said. "William, on my account." Eleanor turned around. Thomas was looking at the hinge in his hands, not at her with the careful focus of a man who was saying something that cost him something. "I know," she said. "I mean it." "I know you do." She looked at him. "That's why I know." He looked up then. The morning light was coming through the window, and he looked tired in the way he sometimes did when he'd been sleeping in the bunkhouse with the other hands who drank and laughed too loud on Friday nights. She wondered not for the first time whether he slept. "The hinge," she said. "Right," he said. He fixed the hinge. Then he spent an hour in the yard with Charlie and the rope, and Eleanor stood at the kitchen window and watched her son follow Thomas's instructions with the exact same grave, focused attention he gave to everything that mattered to him. Thomas was patient. More patient than she would have expected from a man who was so clearly accustomed to being alone. He corrected Charlie twice clearly and without irritation. The third time, Charlie got the slack right and the makeshift lunge line swung properly. Thomas said, "There, that's it." And the look on Charlie's face was the look of a boy who had been told he'd done something real. Eleanor turned away from the window. She sat down at the kitchen table and put her hands flat on the wood and told herself clearly and sternly to be careful. She was a practical woman. She had survived things that would have undone other people by being practical. And the practical truth was that Thomas Callahan had said he was passing through. He had a job at Henderson's through spring, and then he would move on. He was a man in the middle of some private war with himself that he hadn't told her about yet, and she was a widow with a child and a bakery and a land problem that was only going to get worse. Being careful was the only sensible thing. She was still telling herself that when he came back through the door and said, "Your son has good hands." And her chest did the thing it had been doing increasingly against her explicit instructions, and she said, "He does." And the word came out softer than she intended. The following Tuesday, Eleanor learned exactly what Walter Briggs was capable of. It didn't come from Walter directly. It came from Martha Penny, who owned the dress shop 2 streets over and was one of the few women in Silver Creek whose opinion Eleanor genuinely respected. Martha came in for her weekly bread on Tuesday morning with a face that said she was carrying something she wasn't sure she should put down. Eleanor waited. She poured the coffee without being asked, and she waited. "People are talking," Martha said finally. "People always talk," Eleanor said. "This is different talk." Martha wrapped both hands around her cup. Walter Briggs had supper at the Hendersons last Friday. Henry and Ruth Henderson Theodore from the bank, and Judge Morrow from the county seat. Eleanor was still. "I only know because Ruth Henderson told Dorothy Cass, and Dorothy has never kept a secret in 40 years. Martha looked at her directly. "Walter was talking about you, Ellie, about the bakery. He was saying," she stopped, chose her words, "that you had become impractical, that grief sometimes affected a woman's judgment, that your son's future was being put at risk by sentiment." Eleanor's hands were flat on the counter. She didn't move them. "He wasn't threatening." Martha said the same word Eleanor had used herself. "He was just discussing your circumstances, with the man who owns the note on your property loan and the judge who handles property disputes in this county." The room was very quiet. "Henry Henderson," Eleanor said. "Thomas is working for Henry Henderson." "I know." Eleanor looked at the wall. She was thinking fast and carefully the way she had learned to think when the money got short, and the fear got loud, not with panic, but with the particular cold clarity of a woman who understands that she cannot afford to be wrong. "He's building pressure," she said. "Not from one direction, from every direction at once." She looked at Martha. "The bank, the judge, the gossip, the note." A pause. "He wants me to feel like the ground is shifting everywhere I stand." Martha reached across the counter and put her hand on Eleanor's. "What are you going to do?" Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. "I'm going to make bread," she said, "and I'm going to think." She told Thomas that afternoon. Not all of it, not immediately. She told him about Martha's visit while they stood at the fence line behind the bakery because Charlie was inside at his lessons, and she needed to say it somewhere that didn't have walls. Thomas listened without interrupting. That was something she had noticed about him. He did not interrupt. Most men she knew interrupted because they were already composing their response while you were still speaking. Thomas listened until the thing was finished. When she was done, he was quiet for a moment. "He had supper with your banker," he said, "and the county judge, and I work for Henderson." His jaw was tight. "Which means Briggs knows exactly how close I am to this property. And he's making sure the people who matter in this town understand what kind of man I am before I get a chance to speak for myself." Eleanor looked at him. "What do you mean, what kind of man you are?" Thomas looked at the fence post. He was quiet for slightly too long. "Thomas, there's something I should tell you," he said. "I should have told you sooner. I've been—" He stopped. started again. 3 years ago, in a town in Wyoming, there was an incident. During a horse race. I was managing the event, I had organized it, I took fees for it. During the final heat, one of the horses threw its rider. The man's name was Daniel Marsh. He broke his leg badly, needed surgery, couldn't work for 8 months. Eleanor waited. It wasn't entirely my fault, Thomas said, and the way he said it slowly, like a man confessing rather than defending, told her exactly how much it had cost him. The horse had a bad shoe I didn't catch. The course had a turn I hadn't ridden through myself. I should have caught those things. I didn't. He stopped. Daniel Marsh was not a wealthy man. He had a family. 8 months without work nearly broke them. What happened? I paid for everything I could. His medical costs, what I could cover of his living expenses. I stayed in that town until I knew he was going to recover. He paused. But the town decided I was the man who had damaged Daniel Marsh. And I let them decide that. Because I didn't have a good argument against it. Eleanor was looking at him steadily. What does this have to do with Briggs? Because if Briggs is looking for something to use, Thomas said, he will find that. He will find a man who left Wyoming under a cloud. Who organized an event that injured a man and then disappeared west. He looked at her. Which is not the whole truth, but it is a truth that fits the shape of what he wants people to think. She was quiet for a moment. Did you disappear? She asked. I left, he said. After Daniel was recovered. After I'd done what I could. That's not disappearing. It felt like it. Thomas. She waited until he looked at her. Did you hurt that man on purpose? No. Did you do everything you could to make it right? He hesitated. I don't know if I did enough. That's not what I asked. He met her eyes. Yes, he said quietly. I did everything I could. Then what you carry isn't guilt, she said. It's grief. For a mistake you couldn't take back, not a wrong you chose to do. He was very still. Those are different things, she said. You know that. He looked away toward the far fence. His throat moved. You make it sound simple. I know it isn't simple, she said. I carried the wrong kind of grief for 2 years after William died. I thought if I had just been smarter or stronger or warned him somehow. She stopped. It wasn't that. It was just what happened. And I had to learn the difference between what I was responsible for and what I was just present for. Thomas said nothing for a long moment. The afternoon was cooling, and somewhere on the main street someone was calling a child home. If Briggs uses it, he said finally. If he uses it, Eleanor said, we'll deal with it then, not before. He looked at her. You're remarkably calm about this. I'm not calm, she said. I'm deciding to be calm, which is different. He almost smiled. She could see it at the corner of his mouth. Go back to Henderson's, she said. Do your work. Don't give Briggs anything to use that isn't already there. And you, I'm going to go make bread, she said, and I'm going to talk to Frank Dalton. Who's Frank Dalton? He's a lawyer in Billings who handled my property papers when I bought out William's family's interest in this land 4 years ago. He's very thorough, and he's very difficult to charm. She met his gaze. I should have called on him a month ago. Thomas looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize. It was the look of a man who kept expecting to be alone in something and kept being surprised when he wasn't. All right, he said. He walked back toward the main road. At the gate he stopped and turned. Eleanor. Yes. What I told you about Wyoming. I haven't. He looked for the word. I haven't said that out loud before. To anyone. She held his gaze. I know, she said. He nodded once and left. She went inside and stood in her kitchen for a full minute before she started the bread. She wrote to Frank Dalton that evening. She wrote a careful, specific letter laying out the timeline of Briggs's offers and the dinner with the banker and the judge. She described the note on the back step in plain language. She asked specific questions about her property rights, her loan terms, and what legal ground she actually stood on. She sent it with the Morning Post, and she didn't tell anyone she'd sent it. Not Martha, not Charlie, not Thomas. Some things needed to be done quietly. In the meantime, life in Silver Creek continued with the specific insistence that small-town life had not stopping for anyone's private crisis, just moving forward at its own pace, and expecting everyone to keep up. Thomas came into town on Thursdays now, as well as Saturdays. It started because Henderson's fence riders finished the north pasture early and the rest of the crew got a half day. Then it became a pattern. Eleanor noticed when he switched from the bench near the door to the chair closer to the window, the one that faced the backyard so he could see if Charlie came in from school. She noticed when he started knowing which days she made rye bread and which days she made the sweet rolls and coming accordingly. She noticed that he fixed things without being asked now. She noticed all of it, and she told herself to be careful, and she kept noticing anyway. On a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after she'd sent the letter, Gus Prentice came in with a face that was too neutral. "Tell me," Eleanor said. Gus sat down. He took off his hat. He turned it in his hands. "Briggs has been talking to Henderson," he said. "Not about Thomas directly, about the ranch's reputation. About whether it was wise to keep hands who had history in other counties. About whether the Henderson brand could be associated with—" He stopped angry on Thomas's behalf in the way that honest men got angry. "With men of uncertain character." Eleanor put down the cloth she'd been holding. "Henderson tell Thomas," she said. "Not yet. I heard it from Ruth. She felt bad about it." Gus looked at her. "Henry Henderson is a decent man, but he doesn't like trouble, and Briggs is making Thomas into trouble." Eleanor sat down. She thought for a moment. "Where is Thomas now?" she said. "North pasture." She took off her apron and went to the door. "Eleanor," Gus started. "Watch the counter for 20 minutes, she said. "Don't let anyone take the rye without paying." She had never gone to Henderson's ranch before. It wasn't a long ride. She borrowed Martha Penny's horse, which was old and opinionated, but reliable, and she found Thomas exactly where Gus had said, working the north fence line alone. He saw her coming and straightened, and the look on his face was surprise, followed immediately by the specific expression of a man who understood that an unexpected visit meant something had happened. She told him straight. She pulled up alongside him and told him what Gus had told her plain and without softening it. Thomas listened. His face stayed still, but something hardened behind his eyes. Not anger, something older than anger. "He's going to get me fired," Thomas said. "He's trying to. If Henderson lets me go." "Thomas," she waited. "You don't have to leave Silver Creek to lose a job." He looked at her. "You could take work elsewhere," she said. "Gus Prentice has been trying to hire you directly for 6 weeks. You could work your own arrangement. You don't need Henderson to stay in this town." He was quiet for a moment. Something moved across his face that she couldn't quite read. "Why does it matter to you," he said, "whether I stay?" It was a direct question. The kind he rarely asked, the kind that didn't allow for soft answers. Eleanor held his gaze. "Because Charlie would miss you," she said. Thomas looked at her steadily. "And," he said. The air between them was very still. "And," she said carefully, "I would miss you." He didn't move for a moment. The afternoon light was full and flat and honest, and she had not meant to say that here, and this plainly, but she had said it, and it was true, and she had decided a long time ago not to make things smaller than they were. Thomas looked down at the fence post he was holding. He set it down slowly. He looked back at her. "Eleanor," he said, and the way he said her name had a quality that she felt all the way down to her sternum. "I know," she said. "I know it's complicated." "It's not complicated," he said. "That's the problem." He looked at her steadily. "It's simple, and the simple things are the ones that can hurt the most if they go wrong." She understood that. She understood it the way you understand something you have also learned by surviving it. "I know," she said again, softer. "I don't want to be someone else your son loses," he said. And that particular honesty, the fact that his first thought was Charlie, hit her somewhere that didn't have armor on it. She swallowed. "That's a generous thing to be worried about," she said. "It's a real thing. I know it's real." She looked at him. "Thomas, I'm not asking you for promises. I'm asking you not to leave because Walter Briggs is pushing. Don't give him that." He held her gaze for a long moment. "All right," he said finally. "All right. I'll talk to Gus." He looked at the fence post. "And I'll stay." Eleanor let out a breath she had not quite been aware she was holding. "Good," she said. She turned the horse. She was halfway across the field when he called her name. "Eleanor." She stopped. He was standing by the fence post with his hat in his hand, and the light was behind him, and she was not going to remember the way he looked right now. She was absolutely not going to remember it. "Charlie's not the only reason," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "I know," she said. She rode back to town. The letter from Frank Dalton arrived on a Friday. Eleanor read it twice at the kitchen table before Charlie came down for breakfast, and then she folded it carefully and put it in the tin box where she kept the important papers. Frank Dalton was thorough, as she'd known he would be. He'd done more than answer her questions. He'd pulled the county land records and the bank filings, and what he'd found had made him, in the language of a careful lawyer, extremely interested. Walter Briggs had been buying options on properties along the future trade route. Not just Eleanor's. 4 other properties, all owned by people with fewer resources to push back. 2 of them were widows. One was an elderly man whose children had moved to Oregon. One was a family whose patriarch was sick and whose wife spoke limited English. The options were legal. The pressure behind them was not documented anywhere. But Frank Dalton had a contact at the Territorial Land Office who had noticed the pattern too. And the pattern Frank wrote might be actionable under a different set of laws than the ones Briggs was counting on people to know about. Eleanor read the letter a 3rd time. Then she went to find Thomas. He was at Gus Prentice's place, which had moved fast. Gus had wasted no time. Once Thomas came to him, and by Wednesday, Thomas had shifted his bunk and his saddle to the Prentice, spread 3 miles south of Henderson's and closer to town. Eleanor rode out without sending word ahead. She found him in the yard, which was becoming a pattern, finding this man in the middle of work, pulling him out of it with news. She handed him the letter. She watched him read it. She watched the moment when he understood what it meant, not just for her property, but for all of them. The 4 other families. The pattern. The size of what Briggs had actually been building. He looked up. "He's not just after your land," Thomas said. "He never was," Eleanor said. "My land is the most valuable piece, but the others complete the picture. He needs the whole corridor. And he's been working this for how long? Frank thinks 2 years at minimum, maybe longer." Thomas looked back at the letter. His jaw was set. "This contact at the land office," he said. "Frank thinks if I go to Billings, if I sit down with him directly, there may be enough for a formal complaint to the Territorial Commission." She met his gaze. "It won't be fast. It won't be simple. But it would be real." Thomas folded the letter and handed it back to her. He looked at her with an expression she recognized now. It was the look he got when he had made a decision before the conversation was technically over. "When do we go?" he said. "Thomas." "You're not riding to Billings alone," he said. "Not with Briggs watching every move you make. It's a legal matter. And Billings is 2 days' ride," he said flatly. "Charlie, Martha Penny will take him. He adores her." She paused. "He'll be furious he can't come." "He'll survive the fury." Thomas looked at her. "When?" Eleanor looked at the man standing in front of her. The man who had arrived at her door with a broken saddle and tired eyes, who had fixed things she didn't ask him to fix, who had told her a truth he had never said out loud to anyone who had stayed when she asked him not to leave. "Tuesday," she said. "If you're certain." "I'm certain," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" she said, not challenging, genuinely asking. He was quiet for a beat. Because 3 years ago in Wyoming, he said slowly, there was a man who had the power to do something about what was happening to people who couldn't fight back. And that man told himself it wasn't his problem, that he was just passing through. He held her gaze. I don't want to be that man again. The yard was very still. You weren't that man then either, she said quietly. You just didn't know it yet. He looked at her the way he had looked at her that afternoon on the road to Henderson's, and the simplicity of it, the plain, undefended way he let her see it, was enough to make her breath catch. Tuesday, he said. Tuesday, she said. She rode back to Silver Creek with the letter in her coat pocket and the specific, careful hope of a woman who had learned the difference between hope and recklessness. It was not recklessness. She was almost sure. What she didn't know, riding home that Friday evening, was that Walter Briggs had also received information that week. His was not a letter from a careful lawyer. His came from a man he paid to watch certain properties and certain people. A man who had seen a woman ride to the Prentice place, seen a long conversation, seen something in the way they stood together that told him everything he needed to know. Walter Briggs was not a man who waited for problems to arrive. He was a man who preferred to create the conditions that made other people's decisions for them. And he had decided that Thomas Callahan had become a problem that needed to be resolved before Tuesday. Briggs moved on Saturday. Thomas found out the way bad news usually found people in Silver Creek, not directly, not cleanly, but through a chain of people who each knew one piece and none of whom wanted to be the one to say it first. It was Reese who came to the Prentice place before sunrise, hat in hand, looking like a man who had lost sleep over what he was carrying. Thomas was already up working a bridle at the fence post when Reese rode in. He took one look at the man's face and set the bridle down. Say it, Thomas said. Reese said it. Walter Briggs had gone to Tom Parker on Friday evening with a written statement. The statement said that Thomas Callahan, currently employed at the Prentice Spread, had 3 years ago in Laramie, Wyoming, organized an event under false pretenses, collected fees from participating riders, and through gross negligence caused serious bodily harm to a man named Daniel Marsh. The statement further said that Daniel Marsh had pursued legal remedy and that Thomas had left the county before the matter was resolved. That last part isn't true, Thomas said. His voice was level, that particular careful level that took effort. I know, Reese said, but it's written down. And Briggs has a copy going to Judge Morrow and a copy going to the bank in the morning. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the bridle in his hands. He set it on the fence post with a deliberate care that was the opposite of what he felt. Does Eleanor know? He said. I came here first. Thomas looked at the sky. It was barely light, the kind of early morning that usually felt like possibility, and right now felt like a countdown. Saddle up, he said. I need to get to town. Eleanor was already awake when he knocked. She came to the door with flour on her hands, and one look at his face told her everything before he said a word. She stepped back and let him in, and he told her quickly, cleanly, without softening it. She listened, the way she listened, completely still, completely present, nothing on her face that wasn't real. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, He moved early. He knew about Billings, Thomas said. Someone told him, or he guessed. She turned and went to the basin, rinsed her hands, dried them with the cloth hanging from the hook. She did it slowly, thinking. He wants to get ahead of whatever we're going to the land office with. If he damages your reputation before we leave, anything you say in Billings is already compromised. He's not wrong about Wyoming, Thomas said. There was a legal inquiry. I gave a statement. The inquiry cleared me of intentional wrongdoing. But I did leave before the civil matter was settled. Eleanor turned around. Why did you leave before it was settled? Because Daniel Marsh's lawyer told me there was no case and I had done everything required of me. He looked at her directly. That is the truth. I have the letter. Something shifted in Eleanor's face. You have the letter. In my saddlebag. I've carried it for 3 years. He stopped. I don't know why I kept it. I think I just... He stopped again. You kept it because part of you knew someday you'd need to prove you're not who the worst version of that story makes you, Eleanor said. He looked at her. Get the letter, she said. We're going to Tom Parker, now, before Briggs's copies reach anyone else. It's barely 6 in the morning. Tom Parker is up at 5:30. I know because he buys bread at 6. She was already untying her apron. Go get the letter. I'll meet you at the sheriff's office in 20 minutes. Eleanor. Thomas. She looked at him with those clear, steady eyes. He came at you early because he thought you'd be slow. Don't be slow. He left at a near run. Tom Parker read the letter from Daniel Marsh's lawyer twice. He read it the way a careful man reads a document he knows is going to matter slowly, without expression, going back over certain sentences. Then he read Briggs's statement. Then he set them both on his desk and looked at the two people sitting across from him. The letter clears you of civil liability, he said to Thomas. It's dated. It's on a lawyer's letterhead from Laramie. I can write to confirm its authenticity. Briggs's statement says he left before the matter was resolved, Eleanor said. The letter says the matter was resolved and that Mr. Callahan's continued presence was not required. Parker looked at Thomas. Is there any other version of events in Laramie that would complicate this? No, Thomas said. Parker nodded. He was quiet for a moment, thinking with the measured pace of a man who understood that his next move mattered. I can't stop Briggs from sending his copies, Parker said. What he sent me is a statement, not a formal complaint. He's within his legal rights. He looked at them. But I can add a note to my file, and I can let Judge Morrow know that I've reviewed the counter-documentation and found it credible. He paused. That's not nothing. It's not enough, Thomas said. No, Parker agreed. It's not enough, but it buys you time. He looked at Eleanor. Frank Dalton. You still planning billings? Eleanor looked at him. Tuesday? She said. Parker looked at them both steadily. Then go on Tuesday, and don't let Briggs know you're going until you're already gone. They walked out into the early morning, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The street was just starting to wake up the blacksmith's fire, the sound of the general store being opened, 2 horses at the post outside the saloon left over from the night before. Ordinary Saturday morning in Silver Creek, going about its business while Eleanor Hayes's life pivoted on a letter in a saddlebag. He's not going to stop, Thomas said. I know, even if Parker talks tomorrow. Even if people understand the Wyoming thing was nothing, he'll find something else. I know, Eleanor said. He'll keep finding things until we give him something he can't work around. Thomas looked at her. Billings, she said. We go Tuesday. We bring Frank every piece of paper I have. And we trust that the Territorial Land Commission cares more about legal process than Walter Briggs's dinner parties. Thomas looked down the street. He was running through it in his head. She could see it on his face, the way he processed things methodically, looking for the gap in the logic. What if someone follows us? He said. Eleanor had thought of this. We tell no one we're leaving until Monday evening. I'll ask Martha to take Charlie then. We leave before first light Tuesday. He looked at her. You've done this before, the thinking 3 steps ahead thing. I've been doing it since William died, she said. When you're alone, you have to think for 2. He was quiet for a moment. You're not alone right now, he said. It was a simple statement. He said it like a fact, not a declaration, not a promise, just a fact the way he stated most true things. She looked at him. I know, she said. That's the part Briggs didn't account for. Sunday passed in an uneasy quiet. Thomas worked at Gus's place and kept his head down. Eleanor baked and kept her door open and smiled at every customer who came in, including the 2 she was fairly sure were reporting her movements to someone who reported them to Briggs. She was not going to give those people anything interesting to report. Charlie knew something was happening. He was a perceptive child who had grown up reading his mother's moods the way ranch children read weather, and he came to her Sunday evening while she was cleaning the kitchen and said simply, "Is it the Briggs man?" Eleanor looked at her son. "Yes," she said, because she had made a decision early on not to lie to him about serious things. He was 7, not an infant. Charlie absorbed this. "Thomas is helping," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "Yes." Charlie nodded slowly with the gravity he brought to things that mattered to him. "Good," he said. "Thomas is good at fixing things." Eleanor looked at her son for a moment. "He is," she said. Charlie went back to his reading with the settled air of a boy who had confirmed something he already believed. Eleanor stood at the counter for a moment after he left, looking at the kitchen, the flour sacks, the bread pans, the small orange and yellow drawing still on the counter, 5 years old now, and soft at the edges from handling. She was not going to lose this kitchen. She was not going to lose this bakery, or this town, or the life she had built from wreckage with her bare hands. And she was not going to let Walter Briggs turn the first man in 5 years who had looked at her like she was worth staying for into a reason to run. She banked the fire and went to bed and slept better than she expected to. Monday morning brought the first real blow. Eleanor opened the bakery at 7 as usual. By 8, she had had 4 customers instead of the usual 12. By 9, the street outside was conspicuously quiet. By 10, Martha Penny came in with the look she'd had before, the look of carrying something she didn't want to put down. Eleanor poured the coffee without being asked. "What did he do?" Eleanor said. Martha sat down. She put both hands flat on the table. "He talked to Reverend Collins on Saturday evening," she said, about the propriety of a widow woman spending time with a man who wasn't her husband, about what it might suggest about her character." She stopped. "About whether a woman of uncertain moral character should be the one supplying bread for the church social next month." The kitchen was very still. "He used the Reverend," Eleanor said. "Collins isn't a bad man," Martha said quickly. He's susceptible to a well-put concern from a wealthy parishioner. He didn't preach it Sunday, but he talked, and in this town talking is enough." Eleanor looked at the empty bakery behind her. She understood now where the morning customers had gone. Not all of them agreed with Briggs or Collins, but enough of them were uncertain or uncomfortable or simply unwilling to be associated with something complicated. It was not the loss of the bread sales that hurt, though, that hurt practically. It was the specific cruelty of the method. Using William's memory against her. Suggesting that caring for another person was a betrayal of decency. Making the loneliness she had carried for 5 years into evidence of something shameful. Martha reached across and put her hand on Eleanor's. "I'm not going anywhere," Martha said. "And Gus Prentice said to tell you the same, and Reese, and old Albert from the mill." "That's 4 people," Eleanor said. "It's 4 people who aren't afraid of him," Martha said. "That's more than he's counting on." Eleanor looked at her hands on the table. She breathed. "I need you to take Charlie tomorrow," she said. "I need you to keep him for 2 days, maybe 3. Martha didn't ask why. "Consider it done," she said. "Don't tell anyone else." "I know how to keep my mouth shut, Ellie." Eleanor looked at her and felt the specific gratitude of someone who understood the difference between sympathy and solidarity. Martha had crossed to the side that was going to cost her something, and she'd done it without being asked twice. "Thank you," Eleanor said. Martha squeezed her hand and left. Eleanor stood alone in the quiet bakery for exactly 1 minute. She let the anger be real, not hot, not explosive, just cold and clear and absolutely present. She let herself feel the full weight of what Briggs had done. Then she tied her apron back on and started the afternoon bread because the bread still needed making, and she was not going to let Walter Briggs take that from her, too. Thomas came at noon, and she told him. She watched the anger move across his face, real and uncontrolled, for just a moment before he pulled it back, and she was briefly privately grateful that he wasn't pretending it didn't matter. "He went after your reputation," Thomas said. Quiet. Dangerous quiet. He went after my income and my standing in this community, yes. She kept her voice even. Which is exactly what he did to the other 4 landowners. Different angles, same pressure. Eleanor. Tomorrow, she said. We go tomorrow. That's the answer. He looked at her with something complicated in his expression. Like a man fighting the instinct to handle something with his hands when the situation called for something slower and more difficult. I want to go to Briggs right now and... I know what you want, she said, and I need you to not do it. He stopped. If you confront him, she said. He calls Parker. Parker has to respond, and suddenly, we're the problem. We're the drifter cowboy and the widow who can't keep her house in order. We play his game on his field. She looked at him directly. You're better than that. Don't let him make you prove otherwise. He was quiet for a long moment. She could see him making the choice, not easily, not without cost, but making it. All right, he said. Go back to Gus's, she said. Stay there tonight. Don't come into town. Don't give anyone anything to see. He looked at her. And you? I'll be fine. Eleanor? Thomas. I have been fine in this town by myself for 5 years. I can manage one more night. She met his gaze. Go. He picked up his hat from the table. He held it in both hands, the way he'd held it that first night at her door. I'll be at the South Road before first light, he said. I'll be there, she said. He went. Tag. She brought Charlie to Martha's at dusk on Monday, walked him over herself with his bag and his books and the stuffed horse he still slept with but would not admit to in front of anyone who wasn't family. Charlie went with the specific dignity of a boy who understood something important was happening and intended to demonstrate that he could handle it. At the door, he turned and looked at her. You're going to fix it, he said. We're going to try, she said. Thomas is going with you. Yes. Charlie nodded. He seemed to find this satisfactory. He'll make sure you're safe, he said. He's good at that. Eleanor crouched down to his level. She looked at his face, William's nose, her mother's eyes entirely his own expression. She felt the full weight of loving someone that much, the specific terror and privilege of it. I'll be back in 3 days, she said. Probably 2. I know, he said. Martha said she'd let me help with the horses. Then you're getting the better end of this deal, she said. He threw his arms around her neck with the sudden fierce completeness of children who sometimes forget to be grown up right at the moment you need them to be, and she held him tight and breathed him in and then let go. Go on, she said. He went. She walked back to the bakery alone in the dark and packed what she needed for Billings. She was done in 20 minutes. She had learned to travel light these past 5 years. She was at the back gate when she heard the sound. Not a loud sound. A small, deliberate sound, the specific creak of the lantern bracket outside her front door. The lantern William's mother had given them as a wedding gift, the one Eleanor lit every evening since he died. The one she had lit in rain and cold and snow for 5 years because it was the only way she had found to say goodnight to a man who wasn't there anymore. She came around the corner of the building. The lantern was on the ground, not fallen, not dropped. Set down and then crushed deliberately with something heavy. The glass was shattered across the wooden step. The small iron bracket was bent clean off the wall. Eleanor stood very still. She looked at the broken glass and the bent bracket, and the dark space on the wall where the lantern had hung for 5 years, and she felt something she had been fighting very hard not to feel. Not fear, grief. The specific savage grief of something irreplaceable being taken from you by someone who understood exactly what it meant. He had known about the lantern. Somebody had told him about the lantern, what it was, what it meant, why she lit it. And he had sent someone in the dark to take it from her specifically. This was not about the land anymore. This was a message, a personal one. I know what matters to you. I can reach it. Give up. Eleanor stood on the step for a long time. Then she went inside and sat at the kitchen table in the dark and put her hands flat on the wood and let herself be angry. Let herself be properly, fully, completely furious the way she had not allowed herself to be furious since the morning she watched them carry William downstream and understood she was alone. She sat with it until it settled from hot to hard. from feeling to decision. Then she got up, found the piece of wrapped bread she had set aside for the morning, put it in her pack, and went to bed. She was not going to let Walter Briggs see her cry. And she was going to Billings in the morning. Thomas was at the South Road at 4:30, which meant he had arrived before 4 in case she was early. She saw that, and she knew that he had come early on purpose, and she was not going to make anything of it right now. She came up beside him, and he looked at her face in the gray pre-dawn dark and said, "What happened?" She told him about the lantern. His jaw tightened. His hands went still on Cora's reins. He said nothing for a long moment, and she could feel the effort that silence cost him. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I'm sorry, Eleanor." "It means we're getting close to something he's worried about," she said. "If he wasn't afraid, he wouldn't need to do that." "He wanted to hurt you." "He did hurt me," she said evenly. "And tomorrow, when we're sitting across from Frank Dalton and the land office contact, I'm going to use that." Thomas looked at her in the dark. She could feel him looking at her, that specific full attention of his that she had come to recognize as one of the truest things about him. "You're remarkable," he said quietly, not like a compliment, like a fact he was surprised by. "I'm angry," she said. "Anger is useful if you aim it right." He almost smiled. "Your grandmother with the military kitchen," he said. "She'd have had Briggs for breakfast," Eleanor said. This time he did smile, and she felt the tight thing in her chest loosen slightly, not gone, not resolved, but bearable. "Let's ride," she said. They rode. The road to Billings in early spring was cold and long, and they talked more than Eleanor had expected. Not about Briggs, not at first. They talked the way people talk when they're riding together in the dark, and the distance requires filling, and they have run out of reasons to hold things back. Thomas told her about growing up in Wyoming. His father was a rancher named Robert Callahan, who believed that a man's word was the only currency that didn't devalue, and who had passed that belief to his son with the particular thoroughness of men who have only one true thing to give. He told her about learning horses from an old Crow man who worked his father's spread, and who had a method of working with animals that Thomas had spent years trying to fully understand, and still couldn't explain properly in words, only in hands. He told her about the years after the Wyoming incident. Not the incident itself, she knew that now, but the years of moving. Town to town, job to job. Not running from the law, not running from anything specific. Running from the person he'd been, the one who had organized that race, and felt so certain, and gotten it so badly wrong. "Did you ever think about going back?" she asked. "To Wyoming." "To one place, stopping." He was quiet for a moment. The road was lightening ahead of them as the sun started to push at the horizon. "There wasn't anywhere to go back to," he said. "My father's land was gone. My mother passed the year before the accident. I had some friends before, but I didn't know how to be around people who remembered who I'd been. Why not? Because they expected that person still, and I didn't know who I was instead." Eleanor listened to that for a moment, to the specific shape of it. "I understand that," she said. He looked at her. "After William died," she said, "everyone in Silver Creek treated me like they were waiting for me to go back to being William's wife. Like that was the only version of me they could place. When I bought the bakery, half the town thought I was being irrational. They thought grief was making me reckless." She kept her eyes on the road. "But I wasn't grieving wrong. I was becoming someone different. And that looked like recklessness from the outside because they weren't inside it." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Who are you now?" he asked. "The different person." She thought about it honestly. "Someone harder in some places and softer in others than I was before," she said. "Someone who knows the difference between being alone and being lonely. Someone who stopped waiting for permission to matter." He looked at her steadily. The morning light was coming full now, and she could see his face clearly. "You've mattered since before you knew it," he said. She looked at the road ahead. She didn't answer for a moment because she was managing something in her throat. "So have you," she said. "You just forgot to notice." They reached Billings midday on Wednesday. Frank Dalton was a spare, precise man in his 50s who had the eyes of someone who had been lied to by interesting people and had stopped being surprised by it. He shook their hands, sat them down, and listened to Eleanor present everything she had brought: the letters, the timeline, the documentation of Briggs's offers, the note from the back step. He listened the way Thomas listened, without interrupting. When she was done, he said, "Tell me about the other families." She told him what she knew. 3 of them she had spoken to directly after getting Frank's letter, quietly, carefully, over the past 2 weeks. All 3 had received similar pressures. Offers made, then repeated, with escalating implications. 2 of them had already signed options on their properties that they didn't fully understand. Frank looked at the papers on his desk. "I need you to stay in Billings through Thursday," he said. "My contact at the land office can see us Thursday morning. He's been watching the B-Cross land acquisitions for a year." He looked at Eleanor. "If what you're telling me is accurate, Briggs has been operating what is legally defined as a coercive option scheme. It's not murder, but in the territory of Montana in 1881, it is enough for the Land Commission to act." "What does that mean for the other families?" Eleanor asked. "If the commission acts, the coerced options can be voided," Frank said. "Their land stays theirs." He paused. "Your land was never in an option. Briggs never got that far with you." "Because I said no," Eleanor said. "Because you said no." Frank agreed. He looked at her with something that was almost admiration, the professional kind. Repeatedly, which is going to be important. Thomas had been quiet through the meeting. Now he said, "Briggs sent a statement to the county sheriff accusing me of criminal negligence in Wyoming. He's trying to discredit anyone who's connected to Eleanor." Frank looked at him. "Do you have documentation?" Thomas put the letter on the desk. Frank read it. He looked up. "This clears you." "Briggs's version doesn't mention the clearing," Thomas said. Frank looked at both of them. "If this goes to the commission, Briggs's credibility becomes relevant. Every action he's taken to pressure and discredit people connected to this matter becomes part of the record." "Including the lantern," Eleanor said. Both men looked at her. "He sent someone to destroy a lantern outside my home," she said. "A personal item, 2 nights ago." Her voice was steady. "It's not legal evidence, but it's character evidence." Frank looked at her for a long moment. "You're angrier than you look," he said. "Yes," Eleanor said. "I am." He almost smiled. "Good," he said. "Angry is useful." She thought of Thomas saying that about her. She didn't look at him. "Thursday morning," Frank said. "Be here at 8." They found a boarding house near the center of Billings, 2 rooms, the kind of respectable establishment that required no explanations. They ate supper at a restaurant down the street, the kind of ordinary meal that felt oddly significant given everything that had brought them there. Thomas was quiet through most of supper. The thoughtful quiet, not the guarded one. She knew the difference by now. "What are you thinking?" she said. "I'm thinking about what Frank said," he said. "That Briggs's character becomes relevant. That everything he's done becomes part of the record." "Yes." "He made a calculation," Thomas said. "He calculated that a widow alone and a drifter cowboy couldn't sustain a legal fight. That the pressure would break one of you before it got to this point. He wasn't entirely wrong," Eleanor said. 6 months ago, before you came to my door, I don't know that I would have made it to Billings. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how wrong, and I didn't have anyone to talk to who could help me think it through." Thomas was looking at her steadily. "He made one wrong calculation," she continued. "He assumed that a man passing through wouldn't stay, that someone with no roots here wouldn't care enough to get involved." Thomas was quiet. "He didn't account for the warm meal," Thomas said. Eleanor looked at him. He was looking at the table, a slight curve at the corner of his mouth. "No," she said. "He didn't." Thomas looked up. In the lamplight he looked like himself, not like a drifter or a cowboy or a man running from something. just himself. The person she had been watching emerged slowly, stubbornly, like something growing through stone. "After tomorrow," he said carefully, "whatever happens with the commission, whatever Frank gets out of the meeting, I want to talk to you about something." Her heart did the thing it was doing more and more without permission. "What something?" He looked at her steadily. "About not moving on," he said. About what staying looks like, if that's possible, for both of us." The restaurant was warm and full of the ordinary sounds of other people's evenings, and Eleanor sat across from a man who had eaten at her table by accident on a stormy night 4 months ago, and somewhere in those 4 months had become as necessary to her daily life as bread flour and first light and the sound of her son's feet on the stairs. "It's possible," she said. His breath came out slowly, like a man releasing something he'd been holding for a very long time. "Thursday first," she said. "Thursday first," he agreed, but he was smiling. Properly, fully, without the careful editing she had seen him apply to every expression in those early weeks. Just smiling at her in a restaurant in Billings, and she understood that this was what it looked like when Thomas Callahan decided to stop running. She picked up her coffee cup because she needed something to do with her hands. Tomorrow was Thursday. Tomorrow was the land office, and Frank Dalton, and the beginning of whatever legal reckoning could be built from paper and testimony, and 5 years of a woman saying no. But tonight, in this small, ordinary restaurant, something else was also beginning. And Walter Briggs in Silver Creek had no idea what was coming for him. Thursday morning came cold and clear, and Eleanor was up before the boarding house stirred. She dressed in the dark, pinned her hair without a mirror, because she didn't need one, and sat at the small desk by the window with the folder of documents in her lap. She went through them one more time, not because she didn't know what was in them, but because the act of holding them steadied her. Paper had weight. Evidence had weight. 5 years of Walter Briggs being careful and legal and untouchable had to end somewhere, and she intended that somewhere to be today. Thomas knocked at 6:30. She opened the door and he looked at her face and said, "You slept." "Some," she said. "You." "Some," he said. They went down to breakfast without discussing it further. They were past the point of pretending to be rested when they weren't. Frank Dalton met them at the land office at 8 exactly, with the precise punctuality of a man who understood that arriving late to important meetings was a form of argument you'd already lost. His contact, a territorial land office administrator named Gerald Howe, was already in the room when they arrived, which told Eleanor that Frank had done some groundwork she hadn't seen. Gerald Howe was younger than she expected, mid-30s, with the careful eyes of a man who had spent years reading documents that other people hoped he wouldn't read carefully enough. He stood when they entered, which struck her as deliberate. "Mrs. Hayes," he said. "Mr. Callahan. I've been looking forward to this meeting." That was not what Eleanor had expected him to say. She looked at Frank. Frank had the expression of a man holding a card he was about to set on the table. "Gerald," he said, "why don't you tell them what you told me yesterday?" What Gerald Howe told them took 20 minutes and rearranged everything Eleanor thought she understood about Walter Briggs. The B-Cross land scheme was not 2 years old. It was 5. Briggs had begun acquiring options and applying pressure in 3 counties before Silver Creek under a different company. Name the Cascade Land and Holding Company, that had since been dissolved and replaced with a new entity that was technically a different legal organization, but practically the same operation with the same people and the same methods. 3 families in Cascade County had lost their properties to Briggs through the first version of the scheme. One of them had tried to file a complaint with the Territorial Land Commission at the time. The complaint had been reviewed, found insufficient under the existing statutes, and filed away. "Insufficient," Thomas said. "The families couldn't document the coercion clearly enough," Gerald said. Briggs's offers were always legal. His methods of applying pressure, social financial, were harder to pin down. The commission needed a pattern with documentation across multiple jurisdictions to act. "And now you have that," Eleanor said. Gerald looked at her. "Now I have 5 families in Silver Creek, 3 in Cascade County, and documentation from a lawyer in Billings that establishes a pattern of conduct across 8 years. He paused. And I have something else. He opened a folder on the desk. 6 weeks ago, he said, a man named Arthur Pell came to this office. He was Briggs's land agent in Cascade County. The man who actually delivered the offers, collected the signatures on the options, handled the paperwork. He came because Briggs had refused to pay him for the last 8 months of work, claiming the Cascade operation had never officially employed him. The room was very still. Mr. Pell, Gerald continued, brought with him a ledger, not a complete record, but enough. He looked at Eleanor. Enough to show that Briggs knew the options he was collecting were signed under duress. Enough to show that the pressure applied to those families was coordinated and deliberate. He closed the folder. Enough combined with your documentation for the Territorial Commission to convene a formal hearing. Eleanor set her hands flat on the desk. What does that mean for the families in Silver Creek? She said. If the hearing goes as I expect it will. Gerald said, the options Briggs holds on their properties will be voided. His land acquisitions over the past 8 years will be reviewed, and Walter Briggs will be prohibited from operating any land transaction in the territory of Montana. He paused. Permanently. The word landed in the room like something heavy set down after a long carrying. Thomas said, when? The commission can convene in 30 days, Gerald said. Possibly less. I'll push for less. He looked at both of them. In the meantime, Briggs can't legally transfer or act on any of the Silver Creek options during a formal inquiry. I'll have an injunction in place by end of day. Eleanor looked at Frank. Frank looked back at her with the expression of a careful man who had done his job well and knew it. An injunction, she said. Today. By 5 o'clock, Frank said. Tom Parker will have a copy by tomorrow morning. Eleanor sat back in her chair. She breathed. She was not going to cry in a government office in Billings. She was absolutely not going to do that. She looked at the ceiling for exactly 2 seconds. Thomas beside her didn't say anything. He put his hand on the table, not touching hers, just near it, just present, and she understood. Thank you, she said to Gerald Howe. Her voice was completely steady. Thank you for being thorough. Thank Arthur Pell, Gerald said. And your lawyer. And yourself. He looked at her directly. You said no, Mrs. Hayes. Repeatedly. For months. Most people stop saying no eventually. You didn't. They rode back to Silver Creek on Thursday afternoon. The injunction was signed, and in Frank's hands, before they left Billings. A copy was dispatched to Tom Parker by the afternoon post. Another copy went to Judge Morrow with a cover letter from Frank that made the legal situation unmistakably clear. They rode the first hour in a quiet that was different from the quiet of the ride out, less tense, more full. The kind of quiet that has something settled in it. Thomas broke it first. You didn't tell me about Arthur Pell, he said. I didn't know about Arthur Pell, she said. Frank did. Frank found out the day before we arrived. He told me this morning before we went in. She looked at him. I didn't want to say it until I knew what it meant. Thomas was quiet for a moment. It means Briggs built his empire on people he used and then refused to pay. It means he created his own undoing, Eleanor said. He cheated the wrong man. People like Briggs always do, Thomas said. Sooner or later. She looked at him. You sound like you've seen it before. My father's valley, he said simply. She remembered. The man who had come in from the east and bought the valley piece by piece until Robert Callahan's land was gone. Did that man get what he deserved? She asked. Thomas looked at the road ahead. Eventually, he said. Not as fast as I would have liked. Not cleanly. A pause. But eventually. Is that enough? She asked, not challenging, genuinely asking. He thought about it. It has to be, he said. The alternative is carrying the wrong thing forever. Eleanor looked at him. He was looking at the road with the steady forward focus he had, but his jaw was relaxed in a way she associated with him being honest. Thomas, she said, what you said last night, about staying. He looked at her. I want to hear it properly, she said. Not in a restaurant with 12 other people having their suppers around us. He was quiet for a moment. The road stretched ahead of them, and the afternoon light was long and golden, and there was no one else on this particular stretch of the territory. "When I rode into Silver Creek," he said, "I was not planning to have a conversation like this. I was not planning to have any conversation. I was planning to fix a saddle and keep moving." He paused. "I have spent 3 years planning to keep moving." "I know," she said. "I don't want to keep moving," he said. I want what I've had in Silver Creek. The Saturdays, the coffee, your son asking 40 questions, the work that means something because there's a reason for it." He looked at her. "I want you, Eleanor, if that's something you can hear." The horses moved steadily on the road. "I can hear it," she said. "I've been hearing it for a while. I was waiting for you to say it out loud." He looked at her with something that was almost exasperation and entirely fond. "You could have said it first," he said. "I did say it first," she said. "On the road to Henderson's, I said I would miss you. You made me do all the work." He laughed. Fully and genuinely, the laugh she had been gathering, like something rare since the first time she heard it at her kitchen table. "That's fair?" he said. "It is," she said. "I intend to keep track." He was still smiling, and she was smiling, and they rode together in the long afternoon light, with the road running east toward Silver Creek, toward Charlie and Martha and Gus, and all of it the life she had built, the life that was still going to need defending, even with an injunction, even with Briggs exposed. But it was her life, hers and Charlie's, and now if the man riding beside her meant what he said, and she believed that he did something more than just hers. They came into Silver Creek on Friday morning. Tom Parker met them on the main street. He had the copy of the injunction in his hand, and an expression that was professional restraint barely containing satisfaction. "Briggs received his copy at 7 this morning," Parker said. "His lawyer rode out from the county seat. They've been in the B-Cross office since 8. He looked at Eleanor. "He knows." "Good," Eleanor said. "How'd he look?" Thomas asked. Parker allowed himself a small, careful smile. "Like a man who made a miscalculation," he said. Eleanor took the copy of the injunction from Parker's hands and looked at it. The territorial seal, Frank Dalton's signature, Gerald Howe's signature, the date, the specific precise language that said Walter Briggs could not act on transfer or enforce any land option in Silver Creek County pending the Territorial Commission's formal hearing. It was a piece of paper. She understood it was a piece of paper and not a final victory, and that there was still a hearing to come, and still 30 days of Briggs being in this town, knowing she had done this. But it was a piece of paper that changed the weight of everything. "Thank you, Tom," she said. "Good work, Eleanor," Parker said. He said it simply the way he said true things. Then he looked at Thomas. "I'll be sending a correction to Judge Morrow about the Wyoming matter. Frank Dalton sent documentation. Morrow will receive a clear account." Thomas looked at him. "You didn't have to do that." "It's my job to have accurate records," Parker said, "and you're a member of this community now." He said it matter-of-factly, like it was simply the case. "Act like one." He went back to his office. Thomas stood on the main street of Silver Creek, with the expression of a man who had been told something he didn't quite know how to hold yet. Not unwilling, moved, the specific expression of someone receiving something they had stopped expecting. "A member of this community," he said. "Is that a problem?" Eleanor said. He looked at her. "No," he said. "No, it isn't." Martha Penny brought Charlie home that afternoon. Charlie came through the door with the energy of a child who had been patient for 2 days and considered that adequate. He went directly to Thomas, stopped in front of him, and said, "Did you fix it?" Thomas looked down at him. "We fixed a large part of it," he said. "Your mother did most of the work." Charlie looked at Eleanor. "I knew you would," he said. Then back to Thomas. "Reese let me ride one of the Prentice horses, a bay mare. She's got a soft mouth. How'd she go for you?" "She was nervous at first," Charlie said. "So I gave her slack." Thomas looked at him for a moment. "And And then she was fine, Charlie said. She just needed to know I wasn't going to pull. Thomas was quiet for a moment. You're a natural, he said. Charlie received this with the gravity it deserved. Then he went to find his book because he was 7 and the adult conversation had run its course. Martha lingered at the door. She looked at Eleanor, and then at Thomas, and then back at Eleanor with the specific expression of a woman who had seen something forming over time and was now confirming it had formed. I'm glad you're back, she said to Eleanor. Then to Thomas. I'm glad you're both back. She left. Eleanor stood in her kitchen. Thomas was standing near the table hat in his hands, the way he'd held it that first night, and she realized this was the same room, the same table, the same flower smell, and the same worn floor, and it was entirely different because he was in it as someone who was staying. I should get back to Gus's, he said. You don't have to, she said. Then carefully, I mean Charlie's here, and it's not. I'm not suggesting. I know what you're suggesting and what you're not suggesting, he said with a warmth that made the careful qualifier unnecessary. But tonight I should be at Gus's. There's time. She looked at him. There's time, he said again softer. For all of it. We don't have to hurry. She breathed. All right, she said. He set his hat on his head. At the door he stopped not for the last time, but in the particular way of a man who had learned to stop instead of keeping walking. I'm going to speak to Reverend Collins, he said. She looked at him. About what? About whatever he said to people last Sunday. His voice was even. He's not a bad man, you said that yourself. But he said something that cost you customers and damaged your reputation in your own town, and he should know the full picture. A pause. I'll be respectful. I won't threaten. But it needs to happen. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. Thomas, not for me, he said, for you. Your name in this community matters, and I should have done it sooner, and I didn't, because I was afraid of making things worse. He met her gaze. I'm done being afraid of making things worse. Things only get better if someone does the work. She held his gaze. Something in her chest was doing the thing it did, and she was done trying to manage it. Be kind to him, she said. He means well, he's just... I know, Thomas said. I'm good with the nervous ones. She laughed. She couldn't help it. He left smiling. The conversation with Reverend Collins happened on Saturday. Thomas walked into the church at the hour he knew Collins was usually there preparing his Sunday notes, and he sat down across from the Reverend and spoke plainly for about 15 minutes. Collins was not a bad man. Eleanor had been right about that. He was a man who had been given a very polished, very sympathetic version of a story by a wealthy parishioner at a dinner, and had repeated a version of it from concern rather than malice. When Thomas laid out the full picture, the land scheme, the injunction, the 5 families, the testimony and Billings Collins sat with it quietly for a long time. I didn't know, he said finally. I know you didn't, Thomas said. That's why I'm here instead of someone who's angrier about it. Collins looked at him. What do you need from me? A conversation on Sunday, Thomas said. You don't have to say everything. You don't have to mention Briggs by name. But the people in this church who stopped going to Eleanor Hayes's bakery because of something that was said they should hear from you that a good woman's character was not fairly represented. Collins was quiet. And Mrs. Hayes? She doesn't know I'm here, Thomas said. She'd tell me it wasn't necessary. But you think it is? I think she's been carrying the weight of this town's opinion for 5 years by herself, Thomas said. And she deserves to put some of it down. Collins looked at his hands on the desk. He was a man wrestling with something, and Thomas waited. All right, Collins said. Sunday. Thomas stood. He picked up his hat. Mr. Callahan, Collins said. Thomas looked at him. She's fortunate to have someone who fights for her, Collins said, in the right way. Thomas looked at him for a moment. I'm the fortunate one, he said. She let me in for a meal when I didn't deserve the kindness. Everything since has been her doing as much as mine." He left the church. He stood on the step for a moment in the morning air, and he thought about a man who had arrived in this town with a broken saddle and nowhere to be, and had spent months believing he was the one doing Eleanor Hayes a favor by staying. He had been wrong about that. He understood it clearly now. She had done him the favor. The week before the hearing was the hardest. Not because Briggs caused more trouble. The injunction had effectively clipped his ability to act, and his lawyer had apparently counseled him to go quiet and let the commission process work. But quiet Briggs was not comfortable Briggs, and the town felt it. People were choosing sides in the visible, uncomfortable way that small towns do when a reckoning approaches, and not everyone chose the right one. There were 2 days when the bakery was half empty again. Eleanor baked the full amount anyway and sold the extra to Gus Prentice's ranch hands at cost. There was a Tuesday when someone wrote something on the bakery's back fence that Thomas painted over before Eleanor saw it, though she saw him painting and understood. There was a Thursday afternoon when Henry Henderson rode by the Prentice place and stopped to speak with Thomas, and Thomas came to the bakery that evening looking like a man who had chewed through something difficult. "Henderson let you go," Eleanor said. "Not officially." Thomas sat down at the table. "He said he needs to reduce his crew for spring, that it's a business decision." He looked at his hands. "It's not a business decision." "No," Eleanor said. "I have the Prentice work," he said. "It pays enough." "I know." He looked at her. "I want you to know I'm not angry at Henderson. He's not a bad man. He's a man who made a choice to protect himself, and those are the choices people make when they're scared." A pause. "I've made those choices. I know what they cost." Eleanor sat down across from him. She reached across the table and put her hand on his. He looked at their hands. He turned his over and held hers properly, the way a man holds a hand when he intends to hold it and not just briefly accept it. "After the hearing," he said. "After the hearing," she agreed. He looked at her. "I want to rebuild that lantern bracket," he said. "Properly. Iron, not the light stuff it was before. Something that stays up in any weather." She looked at him. "I know a man in town who does iron work," he said. "It would take a few days, but it would be solid." He met her eyes. "And I'd like to hang a new lantern on it, if that's all right with you?" Eleanor looked at their hands on the table. She thought about 5 years of lighting that lantern alone. The cold mornings, the dark evenings, the ritual of flame that was the only goodbye she had left. "You can hang a new lantern," she said, "on one condition." "What condition?" "You help me light it," she said. "The first time." He held her gaze for a long moment. His hand tightened slightly over hers. "Yes," he said, "Nadant." The Territorial Commission hearing took place on a Tuesday in the county courthouse before a 3-member panel appointed by the Territorial Governor's Office. Frank Dalton came down from Billings and represented Eleanor and the 4 other Silver Creek families. Gerald Howe presented the land office's documentation. Arthur Pell, a thin, nervous man who looked like someone who had been waiting for permission to tell the truth, sat in the witness chair for 2 hours and answered every question put to him with the exhausted relief of a man finally releasing a weight he had been carrying wrong. Walter Briggs sat on the other side of the room with his lawyer, a man from Chicago who charged expensive fees and wore shoes that were wrong for Montana. The lawyer was skilled. He challenged the documentation questioned. Pell's motivation, argued the legality of the options. The commission listened. Eleanor sat in that room for 6 hours with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight and her face as composed as she could manage. Thomas sat beside her. He didn't touch her and he didn't speak unless addressed, but his presence beside her was as steady as a fence post driven deep. Gus Prentice came. Martha Penny came. Reese came. Tom Parker sat in the gallery in his capacity as county sheriff with the particular weight that implied. Reverend Collins came. Eleanor noticed that. She did not let herself react to it, but she noticed it. The commission recessed at 4 o'clock. They reconvened at 5:30. The chair of the panel, a woman named Louise Marsh. No relation to Daniel Marsh, as far as Eleanor knew, but the name still made Thomas's jaw tighten briefly. Read the findings in the flat, precise tone of a professional who understood that the moment required clarity, not performance. The Territorial Commission found that Walter Briggs, operating through the B Cross Land and Cattle Company, and its predecessor, the Cascade Land and Holding Company, had engaged in a systematic pattern of coercive option agreements across 3 counties, spanning 8 years. The documentation established both the pattern and the intent. The witness testimony corroborated both. The commission voided all 6 option agreements in Silver Creek County. The commission referred the Cascade County findings to the appropriate court for civil remedy on behalf of the 3 families who had lost property there. Walter Briggs was prohibited from entering into any land transaction in the territory of Montana for a period of 10 years, subject to review at the end of that period. And the commission, noting the specific pattern of personal harassment documented in the file, including a written communication delivered to private property with the intent to intimidate and the destruction of personal property belonging to Mrs. Eleanor Hayes of Silver Creek, issued a formal censure of Walter Briggs by name. The room was very still when Louise Marsh set the finding down. Then Gus Prentice said quietly, "Good." And it was enough. Briggs left Silver Creek within the week. He didn't make a scene about it. He was too careful for scenes. His lawyer managed the process of unwinding what could be unwound, and the properties that had been under option were released with the legal paperwork Frank made sure was perfectly in order, and Walter Briggs loaded his possessions into his black lacquered buggy and drove out of town on a Thursday morning before most of Silver Creek was awake. Tom Parker told Eleanor. She was at the bakery counter when Parker came in, and he told her, and she nodded and thanked him and turned back to the bread she was wrapping. She felt the thing in her chest that she'd been holding tense since the morning she found the note on her back step loosen, not all at once, not dramatically. Just a slow, quiet release like ice coming off a river in spring. Martha Penny came in an hour later. "He's gone," she said. "I heard," Eleanor said. "How do you feel?" Eleanor thought about it honestly. "Tired," she said, "and grateful, and like I need to bake a very large amount of bread." Martha sat down and ordered coffee, and the morning was full of customers because the word had traveled fast as it always did, and Silver Creek's appetite for Eleanor Hayes's bread had apparently recovered significantly now that the circumstances were understood. By noon, the bakery was the fullest it had been in weeks. Thomas came in the afternoon when the crowd had thinned. He came in quietly the way he came in and sat at the table by the window and waited until she had a moment. "He's gone," Thomas said. "He's gone," she agreed. He looked at her. "You all right?" "Yes," she said. Actually, yes, not just saying yes. He nodded. He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. "The ironwork man can start the bracket next week," he said. "I talked to him this morning." "Good," she said. They were quiet for a moment. The bakery had the afternoon feel of a room settling back into itself after a long disturbance, warm and flower-smelling and particular. "Charlie asked me something this morning," Thomas said. Eleanor looked at him. "What did he ask?" Thomas looked at his coffee cup. "He asked if I was going to stay in Silver Creek forever." He paused. He asked it the way children ask things they already know the answer to, but need to hear out loud. Eleanor's heart did the thing. "What did you tell him?" she said. Thomas looked up at her. "I told him that was my intention, if the people involved were agreeable." A pause. He said, quote, "I'm agreeable. You should ask Mama." Eleanor looked at this man sitting at her kitchen table, with flour dust in the air between them and afternoon light on his face, and the expression of someone holding the most careful hope. "Charlie is 7, she said. "He's not the person you need to ask." "No," Thomas said. "He isn't." He met her eyes. "Eleanor." "Thomas." "I'm asking," he said simply. She looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. I'm agreeable." His breath came out slowly, completely, the way a man breathes when a long-held tension finally releases. He looked at her with everything he had. No editing, no careful management, just himself, plain and present, and decided. "I'll start on the lantern bracket Monday," he said. "Good," she said. Her voice was a little unsteady, and she didn't mind. The afternoon went on around them, ordinary and warm, and full of the small sounds of a town going about its business, and neither of them moved for a while. There was no hurry. The bread was in the oven. Charlie would be home from school in an hour. The injunction had held, and Briggs was gone, and the bracket would be solid iron, and the lantern would be new. Everything that needed to come next would come. But right now, in this kitchen, in this afternoon, in this town, that had almost broken her and instead had given her this, Eleanor Hayes sat across from Thomas Callahan and understood that some things did not need to be rushed. The lantern could wait one more night. It had waited 5 years. It could wait until Monday, when the man who had come to her door in a storm would drive the iron deep and hang something new on the place where something precious had been broken. And this time it would hold. The iron bracket went up on a Monday the way Thomas had said it would. He worked through this morning with a methodical patience that Charlie watched from start to finish, sitting on the back step with his chin in his hands and asking questions at regular intervals that Thomas answered without stopping work. The bracket was heavier than the original set, deeper into the wall, with a curve at the end that would hold the lantern secure in any weather Montana could produce. When it was done, Thomas stepped back and pressed his palm flat against it. It didn't move. "That's not going anywhere," Charlie announced with authority. "No," Thomas said. "It isn't." Eleanor stood in the doorway and looked at the bracket on the wall, and felt something that was too large and too quiet to name. The space it filled had been empty for 6 weeks. Before that, it had held something fragile. Now it held something built to last. "After dark," Thomas said, looking at her. "After dark," she agreed. The lantern was new. Thomas had brought it from the ironwork man along with the bracket, a simple thing well made with a glass panel that was thicker than the old one. Eleanor held it in her hands for a long moment before she put it on the hook. It was not the lantern William's mother had given them. It was not meant to be. It was a different object for a different chapter, and she was at peace with that in a way she hadn't expected to be. Charlie had been allowed to stay up, which he treated as the serious responsibility it was. He stood between Eleanor and Thomas on the front step, with the solemnity of a boy who understood that tonight was not an ordinary night. Thomas struck the match. He held it to Eleanor. She took it. She lit the lantern herself the way she had always lit it. But this time, Thomas's hand was beside hers, guiding the glass panel closed afterward, and the small flame steadied inside the new glass and held. The three of them stood and looked at it for a moment. "Who are you lighting it for?" Charlie asked. He asked it the way he always asked things, directly, without performance, just genuinely wanting to know. Eleanor looked at the flame. "For your papa," she said, "and for everyone who found their way home." Charlie looked at the lantern. "Is that us?" he said. "The finding their way home part." Thomas looked at the boy beside him. "Yeah, Charlie," he said. "That's us." Charlie nodded, like that settled something he'd been thinking about for a while. Then he yawned, the enormous, unself-conscious yawn of a child who has been patient past his limit, and said, "I'm going to bed." He went inside without ceremony. Eleanor and Thomas stood on the step alone, with the lantern burning between them and the dark Montana sky above, and the quiet of Silver Creek at night all around. "He's a remarkable kid," Thomas said. "He really is," Eleanor said. They stood together in the warmth of the flame, and the night was very still. 3 weeks after Briggs left Silver Creek, a letter arrived for Thomas. Not from Wyoming. Not from any of the places Eleanor might have expected. The postmark said Laramie, and the handwriting on the envelope was careful and slightly unsteady, the way a man writes when he has been putting a letter off for a long time. Thomas brought it to the bakery unopened. Eleanor didn't know why he brought it there. Instead of opening it at Gus's, she thought maybe he knew, on some level, that he would need to be somewhere solid when he read it, and the bakery had become that for him. He opened it at the kitchen table. She gave him privacy. She went to the other end of the kitchen and worked the morning bread and didn't look at him. She heard him stop moving. The kitchen was very quiet for a long time. She turned around. Thomas was sitting with the letter flat on the table, both hands resting on either side of it, looking at the paper with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not pain, not relief, something that required both of those and was larger than either. "Thomas," she said quietly. He looked up. "It's from Daniel Marsh," he said. She set down what she was holding. She came to the table and sat across from him. "He heard about Silver Creek," Thomas said. "He didn't say how. Word travels, I suppose. Or maybe Frank Dalton's paperwork reached further than we knew." He looked at the letter. "He said he's been trying to write this for 2 years, that he heard I left Wyoming and he understood why, and that he wanted me to know." He stopped. Eleanor waited. "He said his leg healed," Thomas said. "Not perfectly. He walks with a slight limp in cold weather, but he works. He remarried 2 years ago. He has a daughter." He looked up. "He said the years since the accident were the hardest years of his life, but that they were also the years that showed him who he actually was." A pause. "He said he didn't write sooner because he was angry for a long time. And then he wasn't angry anymore, and he didn't know how to say that to a man he couldn't find." The kitchen was very still. "He says he doesn't blame me," Thomas said. His voice was completely level in the way that meant he was working very hard to keep it that way. "He says accidents are accidents, that he made his peace with it years ago and he hoped I had made mine." Eleanor looked at this man across her kitchen table. She had watched him carry this for months, not complaining, not explaining, just carrying it the way he carried everything, with the quiet persistence of a man who didn't know how to put things down. "Have you," she said, "made your peace with it?" He looked at the letter for a long moment. Then he looked at her. "I'm working on it," he said. "More than before." She reached across the table. She put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held hers, and they sat like that in the morning kitchen with the bread rising and the letter on the table between them. "He's naming his daughter Emma," Thomas said finally, "after his grandmother." He paused. "He said he's happy." "Good," Eleanor said. "He said to find something worth staying for." Thomas looked at her steadily. "He said the moving doesn't fix it, that he learned that too." The morning light was coming full through the window. Outside, the main street was starting the ordinary business of a Silver Creek morning, horses' voices, the blacksmith, the smell of the general store being opened. Thomas looked around the kitchen, at the flour sacks and the bread pans and the child's drawing on the counter that was soft at the edges from years of being handled. He looked at the back window and the yard where he had spent a dozen Saturday mornings fixing things and teaching a boy about slack and a lead rope. He looked at Eleanor. "I found it," he said. She held his gaze. "I know," she said. The thing about Silver Creek was that it did not change overnight. Towns don't. People don't. The same neighbors who had stopped coming to the bakery in the weeks Briggs was applying pressure came back gradually, some with apologies and some without, and Eleanor received all of them with the same even open grace, because she was not a woman who needed people to grovel. She needed them to show up. Showing up was enough. Reverend Collins delivered a quiet Sunday address that didn't name anyone but made clear that he had spoken with incomplete information in a previous week, and that the women of this community deserved the full measure of their neighbors' respect. Martha Penny told Eleanor it was as close to a public apology as Collins had ever come, and Eleanor sent the Reverend a loaf of bread the next morning. The 4 families whose land options had been voided came to Eleanor one by one over the following weeks. They came for different reasons. Some to thank her, some because Frank Dalton had suggested they coordinate in case any legal follow-up was needed. One simply because Maria Vasquez, whose husband was sick and who spoke careful, deliberate English, came to the bakery door one Tuesday afternoon with her eldest daughter and said, I want to shake your hand. My daughter told me what you did." Eleanor shook her hand. "You would have done the same," Eleanor said. Maria Vasquez looked at her with eyes that had seen a great deal. "Maybe," she said. "But I did not do it. You did." Thomas watched that exchange from the corner of the room. He said nothing, but Eleanor saw his face, and she saw that he understood something in it that mattered to him. That evening, walking back from the Prentice place, he said, "My father would have liked you." She looked at him. "What makes you say that?" "He used to say that real strength was quiet," Thomas said. "That the people who were loudest about being strong usually weren't, and the ones who actually were strong didn't need to announce it." He looked at her. "You never announced it." "Announcing it doesn't bake the bread," Eleanor said. He smiled. That's exactly the kind of thing he would have said. She bumped her shoulder against his arm as they walked, a small, deliberate contact, and he caught her hand and held it. And they walked the rest of the way like that, in the ordinary quiet of two people who had stopped needing to be careful about being seen together. The second twist arrived on a morning in late spring, and it came from a direction no one had anticipated. Gerald Howe came from Billings. Not with paperwork, not with legal news. He came to tell them something he had found while finalizing the commission's records, something that had not been part of the original hearing, because it had only surfaced in the process of auditing Briggs's financial records after the ruling. He came to the bakery because that was where Eleanor was, and Thomas was there too, because he was there most mornings now, and Silver Creek had simply accepted this as a fact of life, without requiring anyone to make a formal announcement. Gerald sat down. He declined coffee with the manner of a man who had something to say, and needed to say it cleanly. "The bank," he said. "Briggs had a relationship with the First Territorial Bank in the county seat that we didn't fully understand during the hearing." "Theodore Granger," Eleanor said. She had known Granger was at that dinner. She had noted it and filed it. "Yes," Gerald said. "Granger didn't just share information with Briggs about the property loan situation of families in the county. He actively adjusted loan terms for families who refused Briggs's offers." He paused. "Not for families who accepted, only those who refused." The kitchen was very still. "He made it harder to keep the land if you didn't sell," Thomas said. "He raised interest rates on 3 loans," Gerald said, "including yours, Mrs. Hayes." He looked at her. "Your loan rate was adjusted upward 8 months ago. I don't know if you noticed." Eleanor looked at him. "I noticed," she said. "I thought it was a general adjustment." It wasn't. She sat back in her chair. 8 months ago. She had spent 8 months paying a rate that had been deliberately raised to push her toward selling. She had made the higher payments. She had cut costs she hadn't wanted to cut. She had told herself it was just the way things were. "Granger," she said. "He's been suspended pending a territorial banking inquiry," Gerald said. "He won't lose his bank probably, but his conduct will be on official record, and the loan adjustments made under those circumstances can be appealed and reversed." He looked at her carefully. "Which means 8 months of overpayments returned." Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Thomas was watching her. He had the look he got when he was letting her take the lead on something that was hers to take. "How many families?" she said. 3 in Silver Creek, 2 in the next county," Gerald said. "They all need to know," Eleanor said. "Not just about the appeal, about the process. Most of them won't know they can fight this without someone walking them through it. That's why I came to you first," Gerald said. "You know these families. They trust you." He paused. "Frank Dalton has agreed to handle the appeals at reduced cost. He said, and I'm quoting him directly, that you've sent him more interesting work in 4 months than he'd seen in 4 years, and he considers it partially charitable." Thomas made a sound that might have been a laugh. Eleanor looked at Gerald. "Tell Frank I'll send him bread." "He'll like that," Gerald said. She looked at the table. She was calculating not money, not strategy, just the human math of 5 families in Silver Creek who had been carrying a hidden extra weight for 8 months while Briggs and Granger sat at dinner together and decided their futures. "I'll go to each of them this week," she said. "I'll explain what happened and what Frank can do." She looked up. "Will you stay in Silver Creek tonight, come to supper? I'd like you to meet the families directly." Gerald Howe looked slightly surprised, which told her he hadn't expected to be invited to supper. "Yes," he said. "Thank you." "Good," she said. She stood and went back to the counter. "I'm going to finish the morning bread. Thomas, will you go to Gus's and ask if his table is free tonight? We'll need space for more than just us." Thomas stood. He put his hat on. He looked at her across the kitchen with that plain, full attention. "You just turned a banking inquiry into a supper party," he said. "No," she said. "I turned a group of people who've been isolated and frightened for months into a room full of neighbors who know they're not alone." She looked at him. "The bread is just bread." He looked at her for a moment. "Yep," he said. "My father would have liked you." He went. The supper at Gus Prentice's place that evening was the largest gathering of Silver Creek residents since the church social, and it was considerably louder. Maria Vasquez came with her eldest daughter, who translated. Old Anders Bjornsson, the elderly man whose children were in Oregon, came with the careful deliberateness of someone who had not expected to be included in something and was quietly grateful. The two other families came wary at first, and then less wary as the evening progressed and the food appeared, and Gerald Howe explained the banking inquiry in plain language that Frank Dalton's letter had made possible. Martha Penny came because Martha Penny showed up to things that mattered. Gus Prentice sat at the head of his own table with the satisfied expression of a man who had hosted something real. Reese came in late from the north fence and ate 3 plates without apology. Thomas spent the evening doing what Eleanor had noticed he did naturally. In groups he talked to the people at the edges, the ones who weren't sure they belonged or weren't sure they trusted the process. He talked to Anders Bjornsson for an hour, and she saw the old man's shoulders drop from around his ears to a natural position somewhere in the middle of that conversation. She saw him laugh once, which she suspected he hadn't done in a while. Charlie sat beside Thomas for most of the evening, which nobody thought was remarkable anymore. Late in the night, when the supper was done and people were moving toward the door, Maria Vasquez stopped beside Eleanor. "My daughter says that man," she nodded toward Thomas, "talked to Mr. Bjornsson about his chickens for 1 hour. "Probably," Eleanor said. "Mr. Bjornsson never talks about his chickens," Maria said. "He is very private about the chickens." She looked at Eleanor with clear eyes. "Your man is good with the quiet people." "Your man." Eleanor didn't correct it. "He is," she said. Spring became summer in the way Montana spring becomes summer fast and total, like the season doesn't bother with gradual transition. The days got long, and the work got harder, and Silver Creek settled back into itself with the particular resilience of a place that had weathered something and come through the other side, knowing more about what it was made of. Eleanor's bakery was full again. Not because Briggs was gone, though that helped. Because Collins's Sunday address had done its quiet work, and because Maria Vasquez and her daughter came every Tuesday and brought the family across the street. And because Gus Prentice had apparently decided that the bakery was an essential stop on his twice-weekly trips to town and said so to anyone who asked. And because Eleanor Hayes was a woman who baked good bread and kept her door open and didn't ask people to apologize more than once, which was a quality Silver Creek understood the value of. Thomas became part of the rhythm, not dramatically, not with announcement. He moved from the Prentice bunkhouse to a small room above the livery that was clean and had a window facing east, which he said was enough. He took work where he found it. Gus's horses a fencing contract with a rancher north of town. Occasional training work that spread by word of mouth in the way good work does. People started calling him by his first name without thinking about it, which was how you knew a person had crossed from visitor to resident in a place like Silver Creek. He came to the bakery every morning before he went to work and drank 1 cup of coffee that Eleanor poured without being asked. He came back in the evenings when his day was done and ate supper with Eleanor and Charlie 3 nights a week. And on the other nights, Charlie complained about it with the frankness of a child who had clearly decided this was a permanent arrangement and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. You should just live here, Charlie said one evening with the directness that had always been his particular gift. Thomas looked at Eleanor across the table. Eleanor looked at Thomas. Charlie, Eleanor said. What? Charlie said. He's here all the time anyway. Thomas looked at the table. He was doing the thing he did when he was suppressing something, the barely there curve at the corner of his mouth. That's a conversation for another time, Eleanor said firmly. Which time? Charlie said. A different one from this one, Eleanor said. Charlie assessed this, determined it was all he was getting, and went back to his supper with the patience of a child who had learned that waiting was sometimes how you got what you wanted. Thomas did not look up from his plate. His shoulder was shaking very slightly. Eleanor pointed at him without looking at him. Don't, she said. I'm not doing anything, he said completely innocently. You're laughing, she said. I'm eating my supper, he said. Charlie looked between them with the expression of a 7-year-old who understood he had done something that was both unwelcome and also correct, and filed the information away accordingly. The letter that changed the last shape of everything came on a Thursday in July. It came from a law office in Denver, and it was addressed to Eleanor Hayes, and it was regarding the estate of Robert Callahan, deceased of Sheridan County, Wyoming. Thomas's father. Thomas had not known his father had died. He had not been in contact, had not known where to send contact, had lost track of his father in the years of moving, had carried that loss alongside the others in the quiet way he carried things. The lawyer's letter said that Robert Callahan had passed in February of that year, that he had left a modest estate consisting of a small parcel of land outside Sheridan, not the original family ranch which was long gone, but a 20-acre piece Robert had managed to acquire in his later years, with the intention of giving his son somewhere to come back to. The letter had been sent to Eleanor's address because Thomas had at some point in the past months listed her address as his contact address on a document Eleanor didn't know about, which meant Thomas had quietly, and without announcing it, decided she was where he could be found. Thomas was at Gus's when it arrived. Eleanor sent Charlie to get him. He came in with his hat in his hand and his face in the careful neutral he used when he didn't know what to prepare for, and she handed him the letter without saying anything. She watched him read it. She watched him go still. He read it twice. The second time was slower. I didn't know he died, he said. His voice was completely flat, not controlled, emptied. I know, she said. He set the letter on the table. He put both hands flat on the wood. He looked at the middle distance. Eleanor did not try to fill the silence. She had learned from grief herself, from carrying William's loss, from all the well-meaning people who had tried to say the right thing in the weeks after William died, and how much harder it made it that some silences needed to just be silence. She put water on the stove because it was something to do with her hands. Thomas sat at the table for a long time. Then he said, He bought land. Yes, he bought it for me. He said it like he was trying to understand it. He didn't know where I was. I hadn't written in, he stopped, a long time. And he bought land for me to come back to. Eleanor brought the coffee and set it in front of him. He knew you'd come back, she said. He didn't know that, Thomas said. He hoped it. He looked at his hands. That's different. Is it? She said gently. He looked at her. He believed it enough to do something about it, she said. That's more than hoping. Thomas was quiet for a very long time. 20 acres outside Sheridan, he said finally. Yes. I don't... He stopped. I don't need 20 acres in Wyoming. Eleanor looked at him steadily. What do you need? He looked at her. The look lasted a long moment, full and clear and entirely undefended. I need to go to Sheridan, he said. I need to settle his estate properly. I need to stand in whatever place he's buried and say the things I didn't say. He paused. And then I need to come back here. Eleanor held his gaze. Come back here, she said. not a question. "Come back here," he said. "If you'll have me." She looked at this man at her kitchen table, the man who had arrived in a storm and fixed her fence post and taught her son about slack in a lead rope and stood beside her in a government office in Billings and driven iron into her wall and lit a lantern in the dark. The man who had listed her address as the place where he could be found, because somewhere in these months he had decided, without needing to say it, that this was where he belonged. "Thomas Callahan," she said. "You have been coming back here since the first Saturday you came to fix a fence post that didn't need fixing." He looked at her. Something moved in his face that was enormous and quiet at the same time. "The latch genuinely needed fixing," he said. "It did not," she said. He looked at the table. He was smiling. "No," he said. "It didn't." She sat across from him. She put her hands flat on the table in the space between them. "Go to Sheridan," she said. "Say what you need to say to your father. Settle what needs settling." She met his eyes. "And come home." He looked at her hands on the table. He covered them with his. "Home," he said. "Home," she said. He left for Sheridan on a Monday. Charlie stood on the step and watched him ride and did not cry, which cost him something, and Thomas could see it. He stopped Cora at the gate. He looked at the boy. "I'll be back in 10 days, he said. 12 at most." "I know," Charlie said. "You're in charge while I'm gone." Charlie looked at him with those grave dark eyes. "I'm always in charge," he said. "You're just usually here too." Thomas looked at this child, who had asked him 40 questions about horses on the first day and called him by his first name from the second week, and had spent the better part of 4 months demonstrating with complete calm that he had already decided how this was going to go. "That's fair," Thomas said. He put his hat on. "Take care of your mother." "She takes care of herself," Charlie said. "But I'll help." Thomas laughed. He turned Cora toward the road. Behind him, Eleanor stood in the doorway. She didn't wave. She just stood there, straight-backed and steady, watching him go, the way she watched things she trusted, not the way she watched things she feared. He carried that with him all the way to the Sheridan Road. He was back in 9 days. He found the grave, which was in a small churchyard outside the town. He stood there for a long time and said the things he needed to say to a man who couldn't hear them, and who Thomas had to believe already knew. He spoke to the lawyer. He signed the papers for the 20-acre parcel, and then he signed a different set of papers, arranging to sell it to the neighboring rancher, who had been leasing it and treating it well, and would take care of it the way his father had taken care of things, quietly, seriously, without needing praise for it. He kept enough from the sale to do one thing. He rode back to Silver Creek in 8 days faster than he'd ridden out, because there was something he needed to do, and he had been carrying it for the last 400 miles, and he was done carrying it. He came through the main street on a Tuesday evening, and he went to the bakery, and Eleanor came to the door and looked at him, road-worn and tired, and 9 days of Wyoming in his face, and said, "You're back." "I said I would be," he said. She held the door, and he came inside. He didn't sit down. He stood in the kitchen with his hat in his hands and said, "I sold the land." "I heard you were going to," she said. She leaned against the counter and waited because she knew from his face that the land was not the thing. "I kept some of it," he said. "The money, I mean, from the sale." He looked at his hat. "I want to build something." She watched him. "There's a piece of land between Gus's place and the South Road," he said. "About 8 acres. It's been sitting empty for 2 years. I talked to the owner last spring. He'd sell." He looked up. "I want to build a proper horse training operation. Small, focused. The kind of work I actually know how to do." "That's a good use of the money," Eleanor said. "It's not just the money," he said. I need somewhere that's mine, that I built, not just a room above a livery and borrowed work." He met her eyes. "A man should have something he built if he's going to ask a woman to share it with him." The kitchen was very still. "Is that what you're doing?" Eleanor said. "Building something to offer me?" "I'm building something because it's the right thing to build," he said. "And then yes, I'm going to ask you something. When it's built." He paused. "I figured you deserved to know it was coming." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. "Thomas," she said. "Yes, you don't have to build me anything," she said. "I have a bakery. I have a property with good iron in the wall and a lantern that holds in any weather. I have a son who has apparently already decided how things are going to go and is just waiting for us to catch up." She looked at him steadily. "You already have something to offer. You've had it since the second Saturday." He held her gaze. "The fence post Saturday." "The fence post Saturday," she said. He breathed. "Build the training operation," she said. "Build it because it's yours, and you should have something that's yours and because you're good at it and Silver Creek needs it, not as payment." She held his eyes. "You don't owe me anything, Thomas. You never did." He looked at her for a long moment in the quiet kitchen with the lantern burning steady through the front window and Charlie's footsteps moving across the ceiling above them and the ordinary sound of Silver Creek going about its evening outside. Then he crossed the kitchen. He stopped in front of her close, and she looked up at him. "Eleanor Hayes," he said. "Thomas Callahan," she said. "I came to your door in a storm with a broken saddle and no reason to stay," he said. "And you asked me if I'd eaten, and I have spent every day since then understanding that the smallest act of real kindness is the most powerful thing one person can do for another." He looked at her with everything he had. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm not passing through. I'm not temporary. I am here in this town, in this life, and I am asking you if you'll have me to let me be here properly, completely. For all of it." She held his gaze. "I'll have you," she said. "Completely, for all of it." He put his hand against her face, and she leaned into it, and for a moment the kitchen held all of it. The storm that brought him the meals they had shared, the notes on back steps, and broken lanterns, and long roads to Billings and back, the letter from Daniel Marsh, and the grave in Sheridan, and the bracket set deep in the wall, and the boy asleep upstairs who had decided everything before either of them did. All of it held in one quiet kitchen in Silver Creek, Montana, in the summer of 1881. They married in October in the church where Reverend Collins had said the thing that cost her customers, and then said the other thing that gave them back. Collins performed the ceremony with a graciousness that was its own kind of apology, and Eleanor accepted it as such. Charlie stood beside Thomas and held the ring with the focus of a boy who has been given an important task and intends to do it right. He did not drop it. He looked deeply satisfied about this afterward. Martha Penny cried. She said she wasn't crying, but everyone saw. Gus Prentice shook Thomas's hand afterward with both of his and said, "About time," which was the highest compliment Gus Prentice offered, and Thomas understood that. Maria Vasquez brought food that nobody had asked her to bring, which fed twice the number of people expected, and was perfect. Thomas built his training operation that winter with help from Reese and Gus and Charlie, who showed up every Saturday morning without being asked, and worked until Eleanor came to collect him, and then argued about leaving for exactly as long as he thought he could get away with. The operation was small and solid, and within 6 months had more work than Thomas could handle alone, which was a problem he solved by hiring Reese full-time, which was what Reese had been hoping for without saying it for years. Gerald Howe came back to Silver Creek the following spring to finalize the banking inquiry paperwork, and stayed for supper and said it was the best meal he'd had since his wife's cooking, which Eleanor took as the compliment it was. Frank Dalton wrote occasionally precise and friendly letters that updated them on the remaining legal proceedings, and sometimes, at the end, contained small personal observations that suggested Frank Dalton was a warmer man than his professional manner indicated. The 5 families whose options had been voided kept their land, and Eleanor Hayes. Eleanor Callahan now, though she kept the Hayes name on the bakery because William was Charlie's father, and that deserved to be honored, lit the lantern every evening the way she always had. But she no longer lit it alone. Thomas came to the step each evening when the day was done, and they stood together in front of the iron bracket that held in any weather and the flame was steady inside the thick glass, and Silver Creek was quiet around them, and sometimes Charlie came too, and sometimes he was already asleep. One evening late in that first autumn of their marriage, Thomas stood beside her while she touched the flame to the wick and watched it catch. He put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him the way she had learned to lean, not because she needed holding up, but because she had chosen to. "Still lighting it for the ones you lost," he said. She looked at the flame for a moment. "Yes," she said, "and for the ones who found their way home." He held her there in the dark, with the lantern burning between them and the Montana sky enormous above, and Silver Creek settled and ordinary all around. "I found my way home," he said quietly. She looked up at him. "You did," she said, and the lantern burned on, steady and warm, and made to hold the way the best things are, the ones that survive what tries to break them and come back stronger for it, throwing light into the dark for anyone still out there in the cold who needs to know that somewhere in some window someone has left a flame burning for them. The cowboy who came to the door with nothing had everything now, and the widow who asked one simple question had her answer at last. This was home, this was theirs, and it was never ever going to be taken from them again.